Hello and welcome back to my channel, Deku Fanfic. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today, we're kicking off the movie part of our series, What If Deku Becomes a Leviathan Hunter? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is PsychoLimbo from fanfiction.net. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. Chapter 1. Chapter Text. Izuku peered out from behind a few boxes of cargo. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, which was turning gradually pinker as the ocean stretched out endlessly despite the shore still being in sight to the right. A red sunset is good, at least, Izuku thought to himself, drawing his knees up to his chest with a heavy sigh as a wave of nausea rolled through his stomach. After being attacked by a cephalopod like Leviathan about 45 minutes prior, Izuku had had the fortune of meeting his idol, the legendary hunter All Might. The beast of a man was the only merfolk known to be benevolent to humans, and possessed rare ability to sprout legs and walk on land. This made him a valuable asset to the human race in its fight against the monsters of the sea, and he was praised as a hero. Izuku had always wanted to be a Leviathan hunter just like All Might. Well, up until about 32 minutes ago. That was when he discovered that All Might was actually just a normal, withered-looking human who became an unbelievably strong merman when he touched water. The effect lasted for 3 hours, but Izuku had wasted the hunter's time with his question of even though I'm terrified of the ocean, can I still become a hunter like you? You good-for-nothing loser. Defenseless Izuku certainly fits me, doesn't it? He thought, burying his face in his knees. Why on earth he'd even snuck onto the endeavor to watch hunters capture leviathans was unknown to him. Maybe it was habit, his feet moving on instinct to where hunters were at work, but that didn't matter. All Might himself had said it, right. Someone who feared the ocean could never hope to become a Leviathan hunter, who was always risking death at sea. The number 2 hunter's voice boomed over the deck, prompting Izuku to carefully peer over the boxes of cargo again. A large Leviathan just appeared on the radar. Prepare for battle. Izuku caught sight of him briefly, a thrill of awe lancing through his body. Shouto Todoroki was a hulking mountain of a man, with spiky red hair and ice-blue eyes. If looks could kill, this man could have killed a small country. Actually, if you counted the number of Leviathans he'd successfully captured and slain, he probably had killed a small country. Izuku only saw Enji briefly before the hunter disappeared below deck. With a sigh, he began to slip down into his narrow hiding space and reached into his yellow backpack for something to eat. He was just about to open a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers when a brief flash of red caught his eye. He looked ahead of himself, seeing red hair the same color as Enji's flit past his hiding place. Izuku choked on air, quickly peeking up again. Instead of seeing Enji, he saw a boy around his own age with unbelievably striking hair. Half red and half white, split right down the middle. Is that? Izuku had heard Enji shout the name Shouto once or twice, and he'd gathered it was the captain's prodigy of a son. He hadn't noticed Izuku, which was good. Izuku really wanted to see his face, though. Izuku's train of thought was abruptly cut off by the sound of something hitting the side of the boat forcefully. The whole craft jolted, and Izuku felt his stomach lurch. Shouts erupted from the deck and Izuku found himself standing up involuntarily, craning his neck to see what was happening. What in the world? A murky, brownish-green tentacle the size of a culvert slammed down onto the deck about 10 feet from Izuku. Thoroughly startled, Izuku barely bit back a yelp of shock as several hunters raced for the wriggling appendage with shouts of anger. More tentacles began to flail about, grabbing at anything within reach. The fight had only gone on for about 5 minutes when there was a very sudden, very angry shout. Get the hell off me, you giant fucking. Izuku knew that voice. A second later, one of the tentacles farthest from Izuku's position started to retract towards the edge of the deck. This would have been great news for everyone on board, had the tentacle not been wrapped around the leg of a boy Izuku's age with ungodly spiky blonde hair. Red eyes glittered with both fear and pure, unadulterated rage as the boy reached into his pocket and withdrew a pocket knife. Yes, this was Izuku's childhood friend, Katsuki Bekugo, who'd been picked to go along on this trip for the purpose of observing hunters at work. You know, since he was another prodigy at this whole hunter thing. A shoo-in for UA High's world-class hunter training program. He drove the blade into the tentacle, wrenching it around in an attempt to make the Leviathan let go of his leg. Hunters on board struggled to get close enough to Bekugo to save him, but the Leviathan wouldn't let anyone get close. Bekugo's free foot slammed against the railing at the edge of the deck as he removed the knife and stabbed at the Leviathan's tentacle once more. Izuku could see the edges of a large bruise creeping out from underneath where the tentacle coiled around Bekugo's leg and felt his heart drop into his stomach. Oh god, Kaken's going to be. Bekugo was yanked upwards, the knife dropping onto the deck with a clank, and his hands hardly managing to catch the railing. He was suspended over the water now, and his expression had changed to one of terror. Izuku hadn't ever seen Bekugo make this face before. His eyes caught Bekugo's. He wasn't sure Bekugo even recognized him at first, what with the hoodie he was wearing to hide his face, but it looked as though Bekugo was desperately begging for help. He was running. Wait, what the hell am I doing? Being so small, Izuku managed to dodge a tentacle coming at his head at inhuman speed and scoot between the flailing appendages without being touched. He slipped a bit on a puddle of slime and blood from the monster, but he managed to grab Bakugo's knife from where it laid on the deck and grabbed the blonde's wrist just as his fingers slipped off the railing. Deku, what the fuck are you doing here? I don't know. Grab the railing. After a brief period where Bakugo seemed to mull over whether or not to listen to Izuku, he managed to grab the railing and pull his upper body back onto the ship. His body was shaking from effort, sweat beading on his face. Once Izuku was sure that Bakugo was holding on tight enough, he let go of Bakugo's wrist and used both hands to drive the knife into the tentacle again. By this point, the appendage was absolutely ravaged and loosened its grip on Bakugo's leg. Feeling this, he wrenched his leg free and started crawling back on board, helped somewhat by Izuku. As soon as he was back on deck, he opened his mouth with a scowl to rip Izuku a new one for being on board the ship when he wasn't permitted. However, it was at that moment that the Leviathan let out an ear-splitting bellow and began to slink back into the sea. Once again, this would have been fine if something else hadn't gone wrong. Izuku felt the wind being knocked out of him as the Leviathan wrapped a tentacle around his midsection and lifted him into the air. The knife he'd been holding dropped to the deck again, and Izuku began to kick, shout, and struggle in an attempt to get someone's attention. It didn't work. He caught Bakugo's shocked gaze for a moment before he was whisked away from the ship. Below him were turbulent white caps, the water churning with ribbons of red lace through it. His stomach was in his throat as the Leviathan began to descend. Only one other person took notice of Izuku before he was dragged under. Shouto Todoroki raced to the railing next to Bakugo, eyes wide with surprise as he opened his mouth to shout something. Izuku never had the chance to hear him. He only felt the sting of salt water in his eyes and the ache of water pressure in his ears as the Leviathan pulled him deeper. Well, I guess this is how it all ends, huh? He thought, letting the last of his breath escape him as he closed his eyes. His eyes opened to a dark sky glittering with stars. The Milky Way spanned across an endless ocean of black, and his wet hair stuck to his face. He could feel sand drying on his cheeks and scattered within his drenched all-empty shirt. With a groan, Izuku sat up, coughing forcefully to expel some water from his lungs. He seemed to be sitting inside a cave, water gurgling up from an underwater tunnel. Above him, the cave roof was missing, which explained why he could see the stars. The sound of distant waves crashing into the shore echoed from outside. A chill ran through his body and he hugged his shoulders. How the hell did I? Ah, you're awake. A voice came from behind him, echoing around the cave. With a startled yelp, Izuku's head whipped around. Walking towards him from the shadows was the gaunt figure of All Might's true form. He wore a baggy white t-shirt and what appeared in the dark to be dark green board shorts ... or maybe swim trunks. There was a look of relief on his face as he slowly sat down next to Izuku on the sandy rocks. After a moment of silence, All Might removed the jacket he was wearing and draped it over Izuku's shuddering shoulders. Izuku murmured a quiet thank you before sinking into the warmth of the jacket with a sigh. As Izuku started to feel the warmth spread throughout his body, All Might ruffled his hair with a remark of, "You're a strong one, there's no doubt about that." "What do you mean by that?" Izuku asked. "I'm terrified of the sea, and I exercise, but I'm nothing special." All Might removed his hand from Izuku's head with a chuckle. "No, I'm not talking about your physical strength or what others think of you. I'm talking about your heart. Not many people could do what you did, running at a Leviathan of that size unarmed to save someone else." Izuku swallowed. "I was scared, though. Who wouldn't be? Fear's normal in that situation." Izuku nodded slowly, drawing his knees up to his chest. He felt a smile starting to form on his face. "I'm glad I could save him," he broke off with a gasp, staring at All Might with wide eyes. "I was dragged down by that monster. How am I still?" "Yeah, about that." All Might scratched the back of his head with a perplexed expression, as if he were thinking about what to say. "Oh, God, this can't be good. You see ... you remember how I told you about One for All? My ability to change form and gain incredible strength when I touch water. Why yeah, well, there's something I never told you about it. This is definitely not good. It's an ability that can be transferred to another person on two specific conditions. 1. The giver must actively want to give it to someone else, and 2. The recipient must have had a near-death experience at sea. You weren't going to make it, and I was impressed by your heroic act, so I decided to transfer it to you to save your life." OHHH, good God. Izuku was sure he must have turned completely white as he felt his stomach flip over. Bringing a hand to the side of his head, he groaned, "Oh, God. So I can, turn into ... into a mer now." All Might ran a hand through his hair nervously as he stammered, "Well, yes, but ... it's not. And not something you can exactly control." "What do you mean by that?" Izuku asked, although he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Whenever you touch water, you'll gain increased strength, agility, and perhaps some other abilities, but you'll also shift form. I'm sorry, but this was the only way I could save your life." And All Might trailed off for a moment. "I've been looking for a successor to inherit this ability. Due to my injury, I'm losing my ability to use One for All, and you happen to fit the criteria I was looking for in a successor." Izuku stared at All Might for a moment, then took this time to calm himself down. He began taking stock of everything he knew so far and thinking about what could be done. He brought a hand to his chin, narrowing his eyes as he delved into his thoughts. First off, was this situation better than being killed by some slimy monster? That was a definite yes. Now, he couldn't touch water without shifting form. That wasn't a big deal, Izuku never touched water that much anyways. You know, due to his fear of it. Showering would be an issue, but he could work around it when that problem arose. Now, was there an upside to this? There were several, actually. For starters, maybe this would help Izuku get over his fear of the sea. If he gradually worked on stepping into the sea, shifting form, and getting out, then tried swimming gradually farther once he could get in and out of the water, he might be able to conquer this fear. Another good thing about this was that the enhanced strength and whatnot could help him enroll in UA High and become a hunter. The only problem would be all the water-based training hunters did. You're muttering, kid. All Might sighed, snapping Izuku out of it. Sorry, I didn't mean. Nah, it's okay, and it seems like you've got a good head on your shoulders. About the whole getting into UA and getting around the water-based stuff. Well, I'm going to be a teacher at UA starting this year. A few of the faculty members know about my ability, so I'm sure I can get some help in getting you trained while still hiding your alternate form. All Might explained. Izuku nodded, feeling the anxiety start to leave his body. His shoulders relaxed, and he met All Might's eyes with a smile. You're doing all this for me, thanks. I really mean it. Thank you. He once again ruffled Izuku's sand-dusted hair with a laugh. It's not going to be easy, but I'll help you as best I can. Now, your mother's probably worried sick about you, so we should be going. Oh, right. Izuku began, instinctively reaching into his pocket for his phone. He stopped when he realized that he'd probably lost his phone when the Leviathan grabbed him. He could explain to his mom some of what happened when he got home. He'd make up the bits he had to keep secret. So, where's the way out of here? Izuku asked All Might, who let out an awkward laugh. Well, you see, it's either through that underwater tunnel or through the roof of the cave. I pulled you up through the tunnel since I found you being dragged down by the Leviathan. So it wouldn't take long to bring you back that way. By the looks of you, you're probably too exhausted to climb. I'll climb up, Izuku replied, a little too hastily to pass it off as mere eagerness. All Might sighed, rising to his feet. I'd suggest going through the tunnel since it'd give you a chance to try out swimming in your other form before you went home, but if you're not ready, that's all right. Izuku swallowed, feeling the words bubbling up in his throat. I'm afraid. It wasn't just the water now. Yes, he'd come to terms with the fact that technically, he was no longer completely human. It was all right. The thing he was afraid of was the thought of his body changing so drastically. Would he still look like himself? Probably not. Izuku staggered to his feet, his legs weak from exhaustion. There was a dull ache from his abdomen, right around where the Leviathan had grabbed him, but he bit back a hiss of pain and turned to approach the wall of the cave. It was ridiculously hard to make much out in the dark, but Izuku felt his heart drop into his stomach when he noticed that the wall was almost completely smooth. The moisture probably eroded the walls. Izuku let out a groan of exasperation, running a hand through his hair as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. This wasn't good. It was starting to look more and more like Izuku would have to swim out of the cave. Despite his above-average physical strength, he didn't have a hope of climbing out of this cave. Reluctantly, he turned around and approached All Might again. I guess it makes more sense for me to swim out of here. What do I do? Izuku stammered. The fear was washing over him in waves like the water sloshing in the mouth of the underwater tunnel. His hands were clasped together, his thumbs making anxious circles around one another as he tried his best to keep his eyes off the water. That bad, huh? All Might asked, concern in his voice. Izuku just pursed his lips without replying. Yes, it was that bad, he wanted to say. Though, he kept his mouth shut. The blond man let out a sigh, shifting his stance a bit as he scratched his head. After a moment, he rested a hand on Izuku's shoulder reassuringly. Izuku dragged his gaze up to meet All Might's eyes, expecting to see pity or irritation. Instead, he just saw sympathy. It's not far, and I'll help you through there quickly. Sorry to force this on you so suddenly, kid. Izuku shook his head. It's not your fault. I'm sorry for being a burden. You're not a burden. All Might then led the way over to where the water lapped at the smooth rock surrounding the tunnel's mouth. Izuku again swallowed hard. This is actually happening, oh my god. It happened in a blur. Izuku was aware of his wrist being grabbed without warning and the feeling of frigid salt water wrapping around his body. The initial shock of being unable to breathe, followed by a tingling sensation on either side of his neck and the sudden ability to breathe. The dim glow of yellow bioluminescent spots as All Might shifted form and dragged Izuku with him. This indescribably weird sensation in his legs. Then, the sudden silver glow of moonlight dancing above him before he was pulled to the surface. Finally, the welcome feeling of dry sand. His fingers sank into solid ground, and he panicked momentarily when he found he was unable to breathe, but relaxed immediately when air rushed into his lungs once more. Slowly, he back on his knees with a confused expression. What happened just now? The whole experience had taken maybe 30 seconds, and Izuku hardly knew what had even happened. All Might's feet crunched on the sand behind Izuku, and he turned his head to see the man pushing his wet hair out of his face. Other than being completely drenched, it was like nothing had happened to him. One could believe he'd just done the ice bucket challenge or something mundane, instead of what had actually transpired. Shaking soaked hair out of his face, Izuku started to stand up again. All Might, what happened? He stopped. Looking down, he saw that his sweatpants were completely shredded, his underwear still inexplicably intact. What in God's name? I suppose I should have explained sooner, but anything other than tight-fitting clothing or swimwear gets destroyed when you change form. I can't explain this phenomenon either, but just keep this in mind next time you go for a swim. Izuku sighed again. This has to be some weird dream. None of this is actually happening. It's okay, Izuku mumbled, crossing his arms. Okay, so I'm just gonna go home. This is a lot to take in. Thanks for everything, All Might. All Might let out a laugh, giving Izuku a thumbs up. Rest up, kid. You've got a month before the UA entrance exam, so get a good sleep tonight. Training starts at SAP. Training. Right. This is all gonna go away when I wake up. Wearily, he turned around with a half-hearted wave. He had no shoes, his hoodie was gone, and he wasn't going to bother looking for them. This was a dream, after all. There was no earthly way that this was real. Izuku slogged home in the way a zombie would trudge aimlessly through an abandoned city. He was unsure of many things, but one thing he was sure of was that he was tired, cold, and he smelled like salt water. He just wanted to sleep. When he arrived at home, his mother hit him with a barrage of questions. Where were you? Don't you know how worried I was? Why are you soaking wet? What on earth happened to your pants? What in the world happened to you? Izuku was far too tired and confused to answer any of these questions, and his mother seemed to understand, instead sending him to bed. He was vaguely aware of his mother suggesting he take a shower, but he just trudged into his room and flopped down on the bed, face first. Within moments, he'd fallen asleep. Izuku's world comes into focus again, his eyes slowly focusing on the ceiling above him. For a moment, he lays there on his bed, trying to figure out why his clothes are full of sand, and why he smells like seawater. He furrows his brow, blinking groggily a few times before the occurrences of the night before hit him like a train. With a gasp, he sits bolt upright, swinging his legs over the side of the bed and standing up. He makes his way over to the door, throwing it open and shaking his bangs out of his face before making his way down the hall and throwing open the bathroom door. He jumps when he sees he isn't the only one there. Inko looks just as surprised as her son is, with a hair tie between her lips and her hands pulling together a half ponytail. Mom. Sorry, didn't know you were in here. I'll wait, Izuku stammers before turning to leave. However, he's stopped by the sensation of her hand on his shoulder. You didn't even change last night. You could get sick, Izuku, she exclaims in an accusatory tone. With a sigh of exasperation, Inko pulls Izuku back into the bathroom and leaves, closing the door behind him. He's now alone in the small bathroom, glancing over his shoulder at the closed door. I'll bring you some clean clothes. Just get yourself cleaned up before you catch a cold. Inko sighs from outside the room. For a moment, he's grateful for her worrying. However, that turns to apprehension as soon as he realizes that he won't be able to get in the shower without going half fish. Bringing a hand to his face, Izuku groans. God, why me? The door creaks open again just as he says that, and he hears his mother mutter, You don't need to be rude. I'm worried about you. And no, that's not what I'm just. The door opens enough for Inko to poke her head in. Her eyebrows are knit together in worry as she slowly opens the door to stand with her fingers laced together in front of her. Izuku turns to face her, trying not to betray his own worry. Did something happen last night? I know that you're afraid of water, and you came home drenched in it. What happened? Nothing happened. I went for a swim. Inko sighs. If you don't want to tell me, that's fine. I'm just worried. For a moment, Izuku considers telling her about the events of last night. What would she do? Thanks, Mom, he murmurs. He can see the hurt spark in her eyes at his reluctance to talk. Still, she manages to give him a small smile and reply, No problem, honey. As she leaves, Izuku groans and rests his arms on the edge of the sink, glaring at his reflection. Idiot. Maybe she could have helped in some way. It's then that he decides to test something. Slowly, he reaches out for the tap. With a slow sigh, he turns it so that cold water now flows into the sink. Swallowing, he extends his right hand out to the stream of water and places his hand under the flow. There's a tingling sensation wherever the water touches, and the feeling of tiny pinpricks between every one of his fingers. A panicked feeling rises up in his chest as he watches the wet skin turn a noticeably green hue and the skin between his fingers stretch into webbing. His nails turn black, extending into ridiculously sharp claws, and green scales a few shades lighter than his hair poke through his skin. When nothing else changes, Izuku removes his hand from the water and inspects it, turning it over and back again as he pokes at the webbing, runs his other hand over the scales, and fiddles with the claws. It's oddly fascinating to him, this whole transformation thing. Frightening, but fascinating. Why isn't it changing back? He thinks, furrowing his brow. I changed back as soon as I was thrown out of the water, so why? He can't come up with an explanation for this, so he grabs a towel from the rack on the wall behind him and dabs at the water on his hand. Eventually, once he's wiped away all the water, his hand starts returning to its normal form. Izuku is just about to sigh in relief when he realizes something important. How in God's name am I going to shower? Shouto lets out a sigh, sending bubbles rising to the surface. His hair flows around his face, buffeted by the movement of his body as he sinks to a sandy part of the reef. Around him, fish of all different colors and shapes swim closer to take a look. He extends a webbed hand towards a fish that swims close by, his fingers running along the smooth, pale pink scales on its sides. The fish tolerates the touch for a moment before shooting away and darting under some fluorescent orange coral. A small laugh escapes Shouto, muffled by the water as his feet touch the sandy floor. Shortly after, he forgets his momentary bliss and again remembers the boy who'd been dragged down by the Leviathan the day before. Shouto himself had been running to save Bakugo, but the strange boy had appeared out of nowhere and rescued the blonde before he had the chance. Then, too quickly for Shouto to act, the boy had been grabbed and vanished into the turbulent water. The strangest thing was, nobody had seen this happen. Only he and Bakugo had seen, and Bakugo hadn't said anything after the whole situation. He had some connection to the boy, Shouto could tell, but he couldn't pry any information out of him. After the Endeavor had docked in the harbor again, Shouto had run off down the beach and straight into the water to look for the boy. Which leads to what Shouto is currently doing, searching the reef for any sign of him. Clothing, personal items, whatever may have drifted back on the sea currents and gotten caught in the coral. Being half merfolk certainly helps his case. He reaches his left hand up to the side of his neck, once again reassured by the familiar feeling of the gills there. What I wouldn't give to become one completely. He starts swimming forward, assisted by the small red and white fins on his forearms and the webbing between his fingers and toes. Small fish of all colors pass by his face, and his gray and blue eyes follow them as they go. A small smile spreads across his face. Something glints in the sand a short distance from his current spot, partially shrouded in the shadow of a large boulder. Immediately curious, Shouto switches direction and makes his way over to it, reaching down to grab it. It's a cell phone, an older smartphone, a Motorola Moto G with a case plastered in images of All Might's face. He raises an eyebrow. Tacky. Kicking off the sea floor, he returns to the surface, phone in hand. He's careful to keep his gills shut tightly closed, switching to his human method of respiration as he clicks in the power button and waits. Of course, nothing happens. Blowing bubbles in exasperation, he wedges the phone into the pocket of his gray and black swim trunks and zips the plastic zipper shut. He's just about to go back under when he hears a scream in the distance. It's not scared or distressed, but rather exasperated or irritated. Squinting at the shoreline several hundred yards from his location, Shouto can just make out the tiny figure of someone standing at the edge of the water. He furrows his brow. What in the world does screaming solve? He thinks, but starts swimming closer anyways. If nothing else, seeing some random person screaming at the edge of the ocean would be entertaining. He's about 60 yards out, only his eyes and hair above the surf, when he recognizes explosively spiky blonde hair. He groans, inadvertently blowing more bubbles. Who else would scream at the ocean other than the ever-irritating Katsuki Bakugo? A guy would fight the sun, for the love of God. Deku, you fuck, where the shit are you? Bakugo screams, stomping forward and kicking at the edge of the water. Shouto finds himself slightly more interested at the blonde's words. Is Deku his name? You better not be dead, or I'll kill your fucking ghost for pulling a stunt like that. Shouto reaches up and rubs his temples, an annoyed expression on his face. It's far too early for screaming, and Bakugo's screeching is particularly hard on his ears in this form. Thinking better of his eavesdropping, Shouto ducks under the water again and makes his way towards the small rock pile he uses to stash towels and the like. He found the rock pile one day while swimming, lodged underneath a rotting, abandoned dock in a well-hidden cove near his father's house. It had been a blessing, as he'd often ended up having his towels and items stolen from their place on beaches and rocks. This always led to him having to find his friend Yaoyorozu to help him dry off enough to revert to his fully human form. Other than Shouto's family, his friend Momo Yaoyorozu is the only one who knows about Shouto's alternate form. She took the news rather well when she inadvertently found him drying off on a rock near her house, and for that, Shouto was grateful. Shouto reaches the cove, pausing before skirting around a few massive jellyfish floating lazily in the entrance. He continues swimming towards the smooth pile of stones at the far end, grasping the edge with one hand and reaching for the dry towel just underneath it with the other. With one last glance at the fish in the water below him, he takes a deep breath, holding water in his mouth just in case he needs to use it to breathe, and reluctantly pulls himself up onto the rock outcropping. As always, he first brings the towel up to the sides of his neck and rubs the skin dry. After about 15 seconds, he moves aside the towel and touches the side of his neck to make sure the gills have returned to smooth skin. Upon realizing his respiratory system has gone back to normal, he spits out the salt water still trapped in his mouth with a grimace. After a moment, he feels his tongue and teeth change back as well. He makes a small noise, ensuring he can once again speak in human language, before continuing to dry the rest of his body off. See anything cool today? A girl's voice says from behind him in a teasing tone. Shouto jumps a bit in surprise before glancing over his shoulder to see Yaoyorozu. There's a small smile on her face as her eyes glitter with interest. She has her raven-colored hair down today and wears a pale blue sundress. You could let me know when you come here. Shouto sighs, reaching into the rock pile for a dry white t-shirt. I didn't mean to come. I was in the area and decided to stop by to check if you were playing with fish again. She replies. Oh, Shouto doesn't say anything else, choosing instead to reach into his pocket and bring out the cell phone he found. Running a finger along the smooth plastic case, he furrows his brow. You alright? You've been pretty quiet since the whole incident yesterday with the boy who drowned. Shouto swishes his feet back and forth in the water, murmuring, I don't think he's dead. Maybe he washed ashore somewhere and he needs to be rescued, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like he's dead. Momo makes a soft humming noise, coming over to sit beside him on the rock. She removes her brown and white flip-flops and lays them on the rock before dipping her own feet in the water. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you've gotten a crush on a boy you saw for less than 10 seconds. She says nonchalantly, but Shouto can hear the teasing undertone. He snorts, rising to his feet as he rolls his towel up and attempts to slip on the sandals he'd pulled out from the rock pile. Momo laughs, standing up as well as Shouto shakes his feet dry to rid his toes of the webbing between them before putting his shoes on. I was just teasing, lighten up, Momo says with a smirk, but if I end up getting with that girl who works at the music store, you're going to be the single friend. Shouto almost lets out an incredulous laugh, but remains stoic as he glances over his shoulder at her and replies, I have more important things to worry about than relationships. Momo sighs, walking alongside him as he again inspects the phone in his hand. Thankfully, she changes the subject by nodding towards the phone and asking, Where did you find that? Shouto doesn't look up as he replies, It was in the reef. I think it belonged to the boy I'm looking for, but I don't know. I'm going to take it home and try to drain the water from it to see if it still works. Maybe I can glean some information from it. If not, I'll just take it to someone who can find the owner. Ah, I see. Momo hums. The pair of them pick their way through the rocky cove, Shouto glancing longingly at the water from time to time and Momo remaining in contented silence. They reach the overgrown rock face they used to access the cove, pausing briefly to rest before finding hidden handholds and branches to grab at to help them climb. Part of the reason this cove hasn't yet been found is because of the poor accessibility. The only way to access it would be down the almost sheer rock face the pair were now climbing, or from the water. Even then, both access routes were highly risky, what with the risk of falling from the rock face, or the fact that the water route contains many treacherous rocks and is often infested by Namura jellyfish. Shouto shudders, remembering one time when he was younger and swam too close to one to receive a nasty sting that hurt for days. Shouto reaches the top first, turning around to offer Momo a hand up. She nods to him gratefully, taking his hand and letting him help her up. So what are you going to do while you wait for the phone to dry out? Twiddle your thumbs and dream about the boy you're trying to find? She asks, her tone once again teasing. Shouto gives her a withering look, responding with, No, I'm going home to train with father. He's probably already angry that I'm not there. Momo nods slowly, face solemn. I'll ... see you later then. Shouto hums in agreement. As he leaves her standing there, he hears her murmur. Good luck, Izuku. You've been in there for almost an hour and I don't hear the shower. Are you alright? Inko calls in, and Izuku yelps. He's been trying to use a cloth to wash the sand from his hair the whole time, but it's been ridiculously stressful. Mostly because every time the water soaks his hair, the wet hair takes on a slightly bluish hue. He sighs, wringing out a soaked tuft of hair as his hands become merfolk hands when the water comes in contact with them. I'm alright, just kinda slow today. He responds in as cheerful a voice he can muster. Alright then, just ... let me know if there's anything wrong. A pang of hurt stabs Izuku in the chest at her tone. He knows she's deeply worried about his well-being, but he can't bring himself to show her what's wrong. Maybe someday, but it's far too soon to reveal this secret, in his opinion. Taking a deep breath, Izuku makes his way over to the shower. Just breathe. He reaches one of his slowly reverting hands out and turns the knob. Water flows into the tub, and Izuku swallows before switching the water flow to the shower head. He undresses before cautiously reaching out a hand and testing the water temperature, which results in his entire forearm shifting into the scaly forearm of a merfolk. Now that it's his whole arm being transformed, Izuku notices a small fin running from his elbow to midway down his forearm. He wants to reach over and touch it with his other hand, but chooses not to. Instead, he takes a deep breath and steps into the shower, immediately sitting down and drawing his knees up to his chest as the water cascades over his body. This way, I won't fall when my legs change. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, the weird sensation he felt in his legs the previous night returns. Izuku gasps, glancing at his legs in surprise. Green scales the same color as the ones on his arms are appearing from under his skin like magic, and his legs seem to be growing longer. Stifling a cry of shock, Izuku watches as his feet seem to elongate and his legs start to fuse together. There's an uncomfortable tingling along his spine, and he's forced to sit forward so the water runs over his head. As soon as the water soaks his head, neck and face, he feels a deep ache in his teeth and another tingling sensation in his throat and on either side of his neck. He reaches up to rub the side of his neck and freezes. It feels like there are lacerations there, but they don't hurt. The only problem Izuku can think of at the moment is that he can no longer breathe. Inko's washing dishes when she hears it. A choked cry from the bathroom, followed by the sound of something banging against the wall. Worry stabs her in the chest like a knife and she drops the dish she's washing, racing down the hall to knock on the bathroom door. Izuku, what's wrong? An odd sound halfway between a dolphin's whistle and a deep-throated hiss comes from the other side, followed by the sound of something hitting the floor. If Inko wasn't worried before, she certainly is now. She looks around frantically for something to poke into the push-button lock, her mind racing. After a moment, she remembers the bobby pins she put in her hair to hold her bangs out of her face and reaches up. She immediately pokes it into the hole in the doorknob and the lock pops open with a loud click. Izuku, her voice breaks off when she sees the state of her son. He's lying on his side on the floor, a hand pressed to his neck as his mouth gapes wide open and gasps for air. His teeth are all jagged like a shark's, his ears fin-like. Not to mention his limbs. His arms are coated in scales, a fin runs along his spine, and his legs are unnaturally long and also covered in scales. Shoving all that aside, Inko moves forward and kneels next to him, pulling his hand carefully away from his neck as she murmurs, "Calm down. I'm here." She widens her eyes at the sight of small gashes there, opening and closing desperately. Something in Inko's mind clicks and the word gills plants itself in her mind. She sets her mouth in a line, searching desperately for a solution. Rising to her feet, she moves towards the shower and cups her hands under the water, filling them with water before returning to Izuku. Cautiously, she holds it in front of his mouth, recalling what fish do to breathe and hoping to God her hunch is right. "Izuku, please open your mouth, dear. Please." For a moment, he stares at the water, then seems to understand what she wants and lets her pour it in his mouth. It takes a moment, but gradually, it filters through his gills, leaving him looking momentarily relieved. Then, his expression grows strained once again, and Ko kneels beside him, shaking his shoulder as she asks, "What do I do, Izuku? How can I help you?" She ensures her words are carefully enunciated so he can hear them, and it seems to work. Though, when he opens his mouth to reply, all that comes out is a high-pitched whistle. He closes his mouth again before pointing at the towel hanging on the towel rack, then to his neck. Inko nods, grabbing the towel and immediately dabbing at the gills with it carefully. It takes a surprisingly short time for her to completely rinse the water from both sides of his neck, and a wave of relief washes over her as the gills fade into freckled skin. Izuku takes desperate gulps of air, his body relaxing as he realizes he can breathe again. By now, parts of Izuku's body are starting to slowly return to normal, like the fin along his back and the shape of his legs. Inko lets herself breathe again, laying the towel over Izuku's body as she rests a hand on his oddly bluish hair. Now that the worst is over, she scrutinizes his appearance with a more careful eye. There's no doubt in her mind that her son temporarily took the form of one of those sea monsters, Leviathans. A merfolk, to be more precise. "I knew something happened last night." She rests her gaze on Izuku's face, but he won't look up. His expression is ashamed, as if he'd done something wrong. She smiles, gently brushing his soaked curls out of his face. He still doesn't look up, so she laughs. "I suppose it's a good thing I chose to do dishes rather than go out to buy groceries." Izuku stiffens, and his wide green eyes finally flick up to look at Inko. Once he sees that she's not upset in the slightest, he moves to sit up and opens his mouth. Inko blinks in surprise as a string of bird-like chatter slips from Izuku rather than his own voice. He looks just as shocked, bringing a hand to his mouth. After a moment, he tries to speak again, but stops when a hiss is all that escapes his throat. He grits his teeth, rubbing his temples in exasperation with now human hands. Inko lets out a soft laugh, leading to an embarrassed look from her son as he grabs the towel over his shoulders and starts drying his hair and face. Gradually, his legs and hair go back to their natural appearance, and Izuku tests his voice with a soft, "Ah." From what Inko can see, his teeth are no longer jagged shark teeth, and his body appears to have gone back to its normal form. Izuku sighs in relief, then gives Inko a look of shame. Bringing a hand to the back of his head, he averts his gaze and murmurs, "Sorry for making a mess. And for this." He gestures vaguely, which Inko takes to mean the whole situation they'd just come out of. She reaches forward and rests a hand on his shoulder with a smile. "You don't need to apologize, Izuku. From the looks of it, you couldn't control what happened. I'm just glad I was here to help you when you needed it. And I'd appreciate if you told me about this sort of thing immediately in the future so there's less stress." She laughs, reaching up to rumple his unruly mop of green curls. "You're going to make my hair go gray early if you do something like this again." Finally, his shoulders slump and he seems to relax. He even lets a small smile creep across his face as he asks, "You're not mad or upset?" Inko shakes her head. No. If this is a new thing with you, then so be it. I'd just like an explanation of some sort as to why this is happening to you." For a moment, Izuku looks reluctant and slightly anxious. Then he takes a deep breath, stands up to turn off the water, and starts pulling on the clothes he'd brought in for himself. Inko, too, rises to her feet. "I'll tell you what I can. Are you sure you don't need a raincoat? The weather forecast called for a 20% chance of rain." "Mom, I just think you should be prepared." Izuku sighs heavily, one hand still resting on the front doorknob. It's been 3 days since Izuku's inadvertent transformation, and Inko's been too worried to let him go to the beach, what with all the Leviathan hunters patrolling the coastline. In her words, her explanation was, "I'm fine with this whole merfolk thing, but if you're caught or hurt, I swear I'll find and sue the Leviathan hunters who do it." To which Izuku replied, "Holy crap, Mom." She still keeps her worried green eyes fixated on him, so he reaches into the closet and jams his gray rain slicker in his backpack to ease her concern a bit. Smiling, he laughs and reassures her, "I'll be okay. I'm not going too far into the water anyways, I'm just meeting him so I can get a feel for this whole thing." He'd also explained most of the situation after he nearly suffocated to death that day. Inko was aware that it was All Might who'd done this, and that it had been the only way to save Izuku's life. For that, she was grateful and wanted to meet All Might in person so she might thank him properly. Inko crosses her arms with a soft exhale. All right, all I ask is that you ask the man to come for tea after you're done your training with him. Izuku nods, opening the door as Inko calls a goodbye after him. Izuku and Inko's house isn't far from the beach, which is rather convenient for Izuku now that he has this strange ability. His stomach tight with nerves, he jogs at a leisurely pace in the direction of the beach. Despite being mid-morning, the sun's already beating down on the sand and deep blue waves, capped with white, crash into the shore. Nobody's on this part of the beach yet, and the only sign of life are a few crabs shuffling through the sand. Soft white clouds float lazily across the baby blue sky and the air smells of salt water. Izuku finds, for some odd reason, an unfamiliar tug at his chest pulling him in the direction of the water. He furrows his brow in confusion. He's aware that it's likely part of his new merfolk half, but it's still unusual and confusing. To Izuku, it's the same as someone looking at a fire and feeling the overwhelming need to touch the hot coals. The tug starts turning to a dull ache and Izuku reaches for his chest to grasp the front of his shirt. Letting a soft hiss escape through his teeth, he takes a few steps back to test what happens. The tug grows stronger and he mutters, "What in the world? Midoriya, my boy." Izuku spins around to see the stark figure of All Might making his way onto the beach. His hands wedged deep in his pockets and a smile on his face, he laughs. "I was wondering if you'd ever come back, kid." "Well, something came up and I couldn't come." "Oh?" All Might's eyes glitter with interest. "Yeah, I went to take a shower and I kinda, started suffocating. My mom ... had to save me." Izuku stammers, voice gradually growing more quiet as he spoke. All Might's eyebrows knit together, lowering over his eyes ever so slightly. "And how did she take it?" "Surprisingly well, actually. The reason I couldn't come is because she was worried about me. Even today, she didn't let me come without a raincoat." He laughs. All Might sighs in relief, bringing a hand up to scratch his head. Izuku continues in an anxious babble, "Biba, I kinda had to tell her it was you who gave me this ability and she was a little upset, but I had to tell her that you doing this saved my life and all, and now she's really grateful. And now she wants to meet you to say thanks, and so could you come to my house after this for tea or something?" He finally breaks off his chatter by slapping a hand over his own mouth. All Might stares at him for a moment before laughing and rumpling Izuku's deep green hair. All right, I'll come. But first, we have to get you used to your mer form, even if it's just walking into the water and coming back out. Once we get you used to that, we can work our way up from there," he explains, which elicits a nervous look from Izuku. "Oh God." All Might seems to notice this and rests a hand on his shoulder, guiding him to the far end of the beach, littered with massive boulders and tide pools. "Don't worry about it too much. We'll stay in the shallows for now." Izuku swallows hard. It's just for a few hours. Toshinori stands on a boulder jutting out over the water, watching as Izuku stays frozen at the edge. He wears nothing but blue, yellow, and red swim trunks with the words Plus Ultra on the right leg. The man almost laughed when Izuku removed his clothes to reveal them, but choked it back to prevent making the boy self-conscious. Izuku's green eyes are focused almost unwaveringly on the water. "Come on, kid, just a few steps," Toshinori calls encouragingly. Izuku meets Toshinori's eyes briefly before taking a tentative step forward. A small wave washes over Izuku's feet and he staggers as the transformation begins, collapsing forward onto his hands and knees in the surf. Toshinori opens his mouth to tell him it's all right, that the water won't hurt him. When Izuku's eyes close, he takes a deep breath and suddenly moves forward, sinking into the knee-deep water. "Midoriya." Now, Toshinori watches as Izuku's head and shoulders suddenly burst out of the water. His eyes are wide, fixated on the long, shimmering green tail in place of his legs, and he makes a choking sound for a moment before ducking his head back underwater. Toshinori remains silent for a short time, allowing Izuku to inspect his own body. He flexes his tail experimentally, reaches up to touch his ears, runs his fingers across his gills, all with his brow furrowed in thought. The boy's hair is a good many paler shades of green than it was when Toshinori first dragged him through the water, and a few emerald green stripes run along his ribs and hip bones. Toshinori feels a small bit of relief wash over him with a sigh. Izuku's body had finally absorbed the hair Toshinori had placed in Izuku's mouth while unconscious, and now he looked different enough from his normal appearance to not be recognized immediately if someone saw him. After a short time, Izuku slowly leans back to submerge himself in the shallow water. He stays there for a few moments and Toshinori lowers himself into a leisurely seated position on the rock with a half-smile on his face. He's again hit with a wave of nostalgia when he remembers his own first transformation under Nana Shimura's watchful eye. "You'd like him, wouldn't you?" he thinks, tilting his head ever so slightly to the sky. He's abruptly pulled out of his thoughts as Izuku raises his eyes above the water, hair plastered to his head. He's watching Toshinori with a confused expression, and the man straightens up a bit with a small grin. After a moment, the boy tilts his chin up so that the upper half of his face is above the water while his nose, mouth, and throat remain below. A low whistle escapes him, and it's cut short as he brings a webbed hand back up to cover his mouth in shock as his expression changes to one of frustration. Toshinori, however, understands mer speech, being part mer himself. I don't know what. Toshinori laughs. He remembers the first time he tried speaking in mer speech and how he'd had a similar reaction. Izuku flushes a bit in embarrassment when Toshinori laughs, and the man holds up a hand apologetically. Sorry, my boy. It takes some getting used to, but I can understand what you're trying to say. Eventually, with practice, you'll be able to form human speech again. And you'll eventually learn how to breathe both underwater and above water. Izuku sighs, sending bubbles burbling out of his gills and nose. After a moment, he brings his mouth above the water again and lets out a rapid series of clicks. I don't think I'll ever get used to this. You will. I thought the same thing when I first inherited this ability, but here I am. Toshinori replies in an encouraging tone. The curve of Izuku's shoulders relaxes ever so slightly. Thank you, All Might. Izuku says in a bird-like chirp, what exactly do you want me to do? Toshinori glances down the beach in the direction of a cove he'd only had the chance to visit once or twice. He hadn't gone there often due to the risk of being stung by jellyfish, but it was quite a pretty little spot. Using a hand to shield his eyes from the slowly rising sun, he uses his other hand to point in the direction of the cove. I'll walk alongside you on the beach as you try to swim towards those rocks. If at any time you feel uncomfortable, let me know. I'll come get you, he says simply as he moves along the rock to the sandy shore once more. Izuku swallows. I can't swim. A soft hiss from Izuku. Toshinori waves a hand dismissively with a response of, it's all instinct, young Midoriya. Just try what you think is right and I'll coach you along. Izuku looks nervous and somewhat skeptical as he turns his head in the direction of the cove. With a deep breath, he moves his body in an unsure manner. He moves forward slowly, and the sandy bottom must have dropped somewhat, because his head suddenly jerks back, breaking the surface of the water as his hands dig deep into the sand and stop him dead as his eyes go wide with panic. Toshinori stands at the edge of the water, which is about 10 feet from where Izuku stopped, and calls, it's all right. You're doing fine, kid. All Might, I don't know if I can do this. The whistling noise Izuku makes is soft and hitches here and there as if he's stuttering nervously. Do you want me to come get you? He asks, brow furrowing in concern. For a moment, it looks as though Izuku's going to nod his head, which is why Toshinori is thoroughly shocked when Izuku quietly hisses back, and no. I'll keep going. Don't push yourself if you want to come back. We should take this slow. I've got to work harder to get over this fear if I'm going to get into UA. I can't be letting my fear stop me. Toshinori struck by Izuku's words, speechless for a moment. Then, he laughs proudly, hands on his hips. Damn, kid, you're right. I applaud your tenacity. But please, know that it's all right to back out for a time if it's too much for you to handle. Too much exposure to the ocean too fast could be bad, you know. Izuku nods, taking a breath before ducking underwater again. As the beach grows harder and harder to navigate, Toshinori chooses to stand on a rock and watch the shadow of Izuku's body below the blue waves. A smile spreads across his face as he holds a hand over his eyes again. He's going too far. Shouto's searching the cove for shells with Momo when he hears it. A single, distant whistling noise, which forms words in Shouto's head. Oh God, I went too far. The gears in Shouto's head turn, and his eyes gradually grow wider. Momo looks behind herself, an exasperated look on her face as she picks up a starfish off the sand. She carefully places it back in the water with a sigh of, Todoroki, you're zoning out again. He's yanked back to the present by her voice, but he can't stop thinking about the whistle. It couldn't be anything other than a merperson. Shouto recognized those sounds as similar to the ones he made in his mer form. Yaoyorozu, can you hear that? He asks, moving to stand at the edge of the water. He's straining his ears, and Momo stands up to move closer. Hear what? Didn't you hear that whistle a few seconds ago? She raises an eyebrow. It was probably just a porpoise. They come by here once in a while, right? Why yeah, they do come by, but I think this whistle was from a mer. Wait, what? Momo widens her eyes before following Shouto's gaze towards the mouth of the cove. How can you tell? Shouto furrows his brow before replying, I could understand what they were saying. Her eyes light up with excitement and her lips curve into a grin. Well, really, what did they say? It sounded like a he, and he said, oh God, I went too far. Well, what are we standing here for? Let's see if we can spot it. You've been wanting to meet a mer for a long time, right? Well, maybe this is your chance, Momo exclaims, grabbing his shoulder and nodding towards the rocks littering the cove's mouth. Shouto doesn't reply, he just starts running with Momo hot on his heels. Sand crunching beneath their bare feet, they head for the rocks. When they run out of beach, they climb through the graveyard of driftwood, boulders, and dead coral until they stand on a small, rocky outcropping just outside the cove. Ocean spray hits their faces and wets the algae and plant life on their perch, making it dangerous to go any farther. Just below them, a massive jellyfish flounces by. See anything? Momo asks, shielding her eyes from the sun with a hand as she looks out to their left. Not yet, Shouto responds, looking straight ahead in the same position. However, when he squints off to the right, he catches sight of a shadow in the shallows. He swats Momo's shoulder with his hand urgently, not taking his eyes off the shadow moving just under the surface. Beside him, she turns and gasps softly when she sees it. They watch with bated breath as it stops, and Shouto feels his heart stop as the creature pokes its head above the water. Oh my God, it really is one. Momo gasps in awe. At this distance, Shouto can just make out the features of its face, and a twinge of familiarity hits him in the chest. Wide, emerald green eyes, a round face, and a wild head of curly, pale green hair. Momo swats him this time, causing him to glance back over his shoulder at her. Aren't you going to go and say hi or something? Momo hisses under her breath. Shouto blinks once in surprise before murmuring, will you go grab my towel if I do? Yeah, just go before he leaves. Shouto takes a deep, apprehensive breath before removing his shirt and handing it to Momo. Checking below himself again for jellyfish, he lowers himself into the water carefully. He waits a moment for his body to change form, then starts swimming in the direction of the mer. As soon as he rounds a large mass of coral, seething with colorful fish, he halts. The mer's face is twisted with equal parts fear and concentration, his eyes trained on the sand as he swims slowly through water that's only about 5 feet deep. Shouto furrows his brow, thinking hard about why on earth a mer looks so nervous about being in water. It doesn't take him long to come to the conclusion that this one's probably one of the type that can live on land as well. He's like me ... like my mother. Shouto slowly, carefully swims out from behind the rock. The mer still doesn't seem to notice him, so he lets out a low clicking noise. Hi there. Izuku flinches at the sound of clicking, eerily similar to his own speech in this form. It's then that he sees the source of the click. It's a boy wearing nothing but gray and blue swim trunks, but that's not the most curious thing. The most interesting thing about him is the fact that he looks like a mer, but also like a human. His red and white hair flows around his face in the water's currents, wide gray and blue eyes fixated on Izuku. His lips are slightly parted, just barely exposing the tips of sharp merfolk teeth. Rather than human ears, his ears look like the red and white fins of a koi fish. All along his left side, his skin is marked by red patches, also startlingly similar to those of koi, and his arms and legs are lined with the fins of that same fish. Izuku also notices the large burn scar on the boy's face, but doesn't let his eyes linger on it too long. They both have the same webbed hands with black claws, but unlike Izuku, the stranger has a normal set of legs. A pang of envy courses through him at the thought of being able to have normal legs in water, but he quickly pushes it away in favor of a much more urgent thought. Oh good lord, someone's seen me. The strange half-mer seems to notice the way Izuku slowly inches backward and raises his webbed hands in an apparent attempt to calm Izuku down. With smatched eyes fixated calmly on Izuku's own green eyes, the boy opens his mouth and lets out a series of clicks and whistles that form words in Izuku's head. Please don't panic. I just wanted to see a real mer for myself. Well, one that isn't me and isn't dead, that is. It's then that Izuku realizes something important. Oh crap, this is Shouto Todoroki ... and he's half mer. Slowly, Izuku opens his own mouth to respond. Oh. Here, Inji Todoroki's son ... right. Shouto's expression darkens at Izuku's words, and the fins on his arms and legs seem to flare out a bit in agitation. Why yeah, Izuku swallows, feeling anxiety rising in his chest. He really shouldn't be here chatting with the son of Inji Todoroki, the number 2 Leviathan Hunter. If Inji came looking for Shouto, Izuku would literally be sleeping with the fishes. Not necessarily in one piece, either. I understand you're probably nervous about Inji, but there's no need to worry. From the looks of it, you live both on land and in the sea, right? Shouto chirps, making Izuku aware of the fact that his thoughts probably hadn't been silent. Sorry, I didn't mean to say all that out loud. And ... what makes you say that? Never heard of a mer who looks panicky in the water and swims so close to shore. Izuku pauses, considering whether or not to concoct a lie of sorts, but changes his mind. This is the prodigy son of the captain of the Endeavor. Such a stupid and poorly thought out lie wouldn't get past this one. Alright, you got me. I recently had this thing happen to me and now, I can't touch water without, this whole merfolk thing. You don't need to explain if you don't want to. He sighs, sending bubbles out of his nose and the gills on either side of his neck. How did you get to become a full mer? What? Shouto gestures towards himself with a hiss of, I want to live in the sea. Not part-time. All the time. If I could become. Hey kid, you still out there? A muffled voice from the surface stops Shouto's words. Izuku immediately addresses Shouto, anxious to return to land. I don't really know, myself. But, I need to go. I'm kinda scared of the sea. Shouto blinks once, thoughtfully. Izuku starts attempting to turn towards the shore, still feeling awkward in this form. I understand. Well, you already know my name, but what's yours? Oh god, what do I say? As Izuku hunts desperately for names, one rolls off his tongue unintentionally. Nereus. Shit. There's silence for a moment before Shouto chirps. Like the Greek myth, the old man of the sea. Why yep, I want to drown. I'm pretty sure that's not your name, but if that's what you want me to call you, then so be it. Will I see you again? Oh god, why Nereus, ugh, I just want legs again. I don't know. I don't like being here. And in the water, I mean. Shouto sighs again. Well, if you're around, feel free to swim into that cove there. There's a lot of jellyfish near the entrance, but if you skirt around them, there's no problem. I can teach you how to swim and some merfolk stuff. Oh, and some stuff about preventing being found out in public. I'll think about it. Shouto's heart is pounding with excitement, and his ecstasy almost reaches his face. After all, he just got the chance to speak with a mer, even if it was a human in mer form. A tendril of envy winds around his heart at the thought of Nereus being able to become full mer but not wanting to do anything with this gift. With a sigh, he returns to the outcropping where Momo waits and grabs the edge of the rock she's standing on to poke his head and shoulders above the waves. She lowers herself to her hands and knees, eyes wide as she asks, "So, how'd it go?" Shouto opens his mouth to speak, forgetting for a moment that Momo can't understand him, and lets out a few quick clicks and whistles. He cuts himself off almost immediately with a vague blush of embarrassment, and Momo responds to him in a teasing tone. "I thought I was clear when I said I don't speak dolphin." With a withering glance at her, he switches to speaking with his hands, gesturing in small, quick motions. "It's not dolphin," Momo sighs, pushing some flyaway strands of hair back out of her face, before replying, "Anyways, how is it?" "Talking with the mer, I mean." Shouto gestures rapidly. "He's like me, where he's mostly human but touching water makes him change form. I think he didn't want to give me his real name, but he asked me to call him." Shouto pauses for a moment to think of what the sign for Nereus would be before settling on writing it out letter by letter for Momo. "Nereus, that's pretty strange." "Yeah, I said the same thing, but he looked just as embarrassed to be asking to be called that. I don't think it was intentional." "Well, maybe you should give him something to call himself that's not so." She searches for a word, but Shouto just nods before responding. "I know what you mean. I asked him to come by the cove sometime, but the guy's terrified of the ocean. I don't know if he'll come." "He is scared of water," Momo echoes, brow furrowed in confusion, before she sighs. "I'm sure he has his reasons." "We'll still wait for him, right? Or do you recognize him from school at all?" "He seemed vaguely familiar, but I don't recall meeting anyone at school that looks like him." "Are you sure he's not that boy you've been looking for?" Shouto's body goes rigid and he brings a palm to his forehead. Of course, there was no other explanation for this to happen to Nereus other than a near-death experience at sea. After all, many hunters, sailors, and fishermen had reportedly been seen in the forms of violent merfolk after vanishing at sea. Nereus just happened to be one that wasn't full mer, and who didn't have a craving for human blood. Now that you mention it, I recognize him as the boy I've been looking for. I think his name is Deku. I heard Katsuki Bakugo screaming at the ocean a few days ago and saying that name. Momo blinks in surprise. Why was he screaming it? Never mind, if it's important, I'll find out. So, maybe you should find Bakugo and ask him about Deku. Shouto shakes his head. No, I don't think it'd be right if I went prying into his personal life. Also, Bakugo is ... he's a pain in the ass. Momo sighs. I can't disagree with you there, from what you've told me about him. Now, she reaches behind her and holds up a teal-colored towel. You want this yet? Or are you going to do some more swimming around? Shouto shakes his head. No, I think I'm all right for now. I'll meet you at the rock in the cove where I usually keep my stuff. All right, then. See you there, Momo says with a smile, rising to her feet and navigating the narrow rock ledge back into the cove. She uses a hand to balance herself as she goes, brow furrowed in concentration. Shouto sinks back into the water, utilizing the fins on his arms and legs in conjunction with his legs to shoot through the water at a ridiculous speed. He can almost hear Momo's remark of "you're gonna run into something one of these days if you move that fast," and lets a small smile spread across his face. Momo's almost to the rock when Shouto pokes his head above the surface, hands locked on the edge. She steps lightly across the sand, kneeling down in front of him to hand him the towel. As he takes it and begins to dry himself off, she whistles incredulously. I can't believe your boyfriend is a mer. Shouto elbows her lightly, and she laughs. All might, I saw someone down there. Izuku's hardly regained his ability to speak normally when he chooses to say this to his mentor. The man widens his eyes a bit, replying, What do you mean? Swimmers, scuba divers. Izuku shakes his head, acutely aware of how shockingly pale his hair is as his wet bangs brush past his face. And no, they were like me ... like us, I mean. It was a boy who was kinda between human and merfolk. What? Really? Yeah. Actually, I think I'd like to see him again sometime. All Might gives Izuku a thoughtful look, bringing a hand to his chin with a hum. It's dangerous for an unknown and inexperienced mer like yourself to be so close to shore unsupervised, you know. Leviathan hunters could see you. Izuku starts drying his hair with the towel he brought for himself. I know, I just ... he offered to show me how to swim and stuff like that. And how to prevent being found out in public. I think he'd be a huge help on the days you reach your time limit and can't change form to teach me things. Izuku stands up on shaky legs, feeling his abdominal muscles ache from use. He winces a bit, and starts walking across the rocks to where All Might moved his backpack. You're right about that, actually. There are also a fair amount of merfolk like us who can live both on land and in the sea, so as long as you keep quiet about one for all and just say you're one of those merfolk, I think it should be alright. Izuku pulls his t-shirt over his head, still unable to quell the odd pull he feels in his chest to return to the water. He glances out at the horizon thoughtfully, and despite his fear of the water, he wants to return to it. With a groan, he dries the last wet parts of his hair and returns it to its normal deep green. You feel the pull of the ocean, don't you? All Might inquires, walking across the sand to place a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Yeah, what exactly is it, though? I mean, I know what it is, but why is it suddenly affecting me? Now that you're half and half, you'll experience some characteristics of both human and mer in each form. As you noticed, you still feel fear when you're in the water, and as long as you're on land, you'll feel a pull to return to it. You fear the sea, merfolk fear the land. It's an odd feeling at first, but you should get used to it eventually. All Might explains slowly, as if thinking out the explanation right then and there. Izuku sighs heavily. I see. Well, since we're done here, are you going to come meet my mom? All Might nods. Lead the way, my boy. The silence hanging between Inko and All Might is almost deafening, Izuku thinks to himself. The stares they give each other are almost as intense, but not in a bad way. All Might looks nervous, but Inko stares back with curiosity written in her forest green eyes. Izuku shuffles in his seat nervously as the three of them sit at the kitchen table, the sound of the kettle burbling on the stove being the only other noise in the apartment. Finally, just when Izuku feels like screaming, Inko murmurs, "You're All Might, right?" The number 1 hunter rubs long, bony fingers against the back of his neck and glances off to the side. Yes, that's me. Inko goes quiet again, but this time, she lets a smile form on her face, lighting up her eyes. With a soft chuckle, she brings a hand to her chin. That means you're responsible for my son acting fishy lately. Dead silence hangs in the air for a moment. However, it's quickly broken by All Might bursting out with laughter and Izuku tilting his head backwards with his hands pressed to his eyes. An exasperated groan ekes out from Izuku's throat as Inko and All Might share a laugh at the boy's expense. When the laughter finally dies down, Inko wipes her eyes on her sleeve, a smile still lingering on her face. I owe you my immeasurable gratitude for saving his life. I don't know if I'd be able to handle losing another family member to the sea. Izuku lowers his hands from his eyes, staring at the ceiling with a frown. The mood just grew heavy. All Might hums in sympathy, responding, I understand completely, Mrs. Midoriya. And it was no trouble at all. He acted with true heroic flair when he saved that blonde boy. Though I assure you, I'll prevent him from getting himself into similar situations in the future. Inko lets out a relieved sigh. I'm glad. Thank you, All Might. The man dips his head, and Izuku looks back at his mother, opening his mouth to speak when the kettle begins to squeal in protest. The lid bounces precariously, and as Inko moves to catch it, Izuku leaps to his feet, hands resting on the table as he exclaims, Don't worry, I'll get it. Inko widens her eyes in surprise, but smiles gratefully in her son's direction. Izuku grins back before he moves towards the stove. He turns off the burner, moving the kettle off the hot element with a smile as he busies himself with preparing 3 cups of tea. Though, he still listens to the casual conversation bouncing between his mother and his mentor. It doesn't take long, however, for Izuku to sink into his own thoughts. Specifically, thoughts of Shouto Todoroki and the prospect of meeting him again, surrounded by fish of all colors. It occurs to Izuku just then that fish are a lot prettier than he remembers them being at aquariums. Is it just a new merform, or am I seriously thinking that fish look better in the ocean? In theory, at least in Izuku's mind, this is likely very true. Taking into account the more ragged and mangy form of zoo animals in comparison to animals born and raised in the wild, it makes perfect sense. Animals bred in the wild obviously looked better in their natural habitat, as they were meant to be there and can only be truly healthy when in the optimal environment. This obviously explains why the fish Izuku saw darting through the reef looked so much pretty. Izuku, you're mumbling about fish over there. Is everything alright? Inko interjects, which startles Izuku out of his thoughts with a yelp. He grins shakily over his shoulder, stammering, Why yeah I was just. I've never seen fish look so pretty before. Oh god, that sounds lame. All Might chuckles, bringing a hand to his chin as he says, I understand where you're coming from. I imagine, what with you being aquaphobic for the majority of your life, you haven't seen fish in the ocean firsthand. Marine life looks a lot better in the sea, doesn't it? Izuku nods with pursed lips, quickly turning his attention back to the tea that slowly steeps in the pot. Still, as his mother begins chattering away about Izuku's characteristics in his mer form, his mind wanders back to the boy with the two-toned hair who spoke of wanting to live in the sea. His nose wrinkles in confusion. Who on earth would rather live in the sea? Ironically enough, as he thinks about this, he feels a sharp tug in his chest in the direction of the kitchen sink. Izuku groans inwardly, pouring the tea into the 3 cups on the counter before giving in to the urge to touch water and turning on the tap. His hands plunge under the stream much more urgently than he intends to, and he grimaces at the sensation of his skin being replaced by scales. Izuku, what are you doing? Inko asks with a tone of curiosity. To this, Izuku has no answer. What could he say? That he wanted to wash his hands. He just felt like it. He acted on impulse. Fish-like instincts. All of those sounded ridiculous to him. So, he just purses his lips and flexes his fingers to test the webbing between them. This is normal. It's tough to deal with at first, since the instinct to return to water is foreign to him, so don't be surprised if he acts on impulse and touches water. He'll need to rein in his impulse drive if he wants to stay undiscovered. All Might explains, which makes Izuku's head snap around almost quickly enough to give him whiplash. So you're saying ... if it rains outside. I might be struggling with all my will to not go outside and stand in the rain until only at first. It'll get easier to distract yourself as time goes on. All Might interjects, index finger raised matter-of-factly. Even so, Izuku doesn't feel all that reassured. And how long is only at first? He asks, not entirely convinced he wants to hear the answer. And for me it was about 4 months. 4 months. That's a rough estimate. It could be shorter and it could be longer. Izuku chokes back the urge to burst out saying I can't do something like that for so long. In favor of being polite, he closes his eyes, interlacing his fingers as best he can, and takes a few deep breaths. Calm down. I can do this. Opening his eyes again, he feels he's in a slightly more rational state of mind. He raises his head into a more confident position before turning around, leaning back against the counter with his weight resting on his right foot. His mouth opens as he prepares to speak, but he rests his hands against the countertop and winces as his claws scrape against it with a shrill sound. He chooses instead to hold his hands in front of him as he speaks. All right, are there ways to cope with it that you can share with me? I think it'd be good if I learned from someone with this sort of experience. Izuku asks, watching All Might with a smile. The man nods, rattling off some methods. When I first inherited this ability, I learned from 2 mentors who were very familiar with it. Some of the ways they taught me to deal with the merfolk instinct were to distract myself by watching TV, reading, studying, building small models, and the like. If it was too much to bear, I dealt with it by running a bath and staying in there until I felt calm enough to dry off and go about my business. The only difference that might be an issue is that I was scared of water too, but I also chose to swim regularly in an attempt to conquer that fear, whereas you've deprived yourself of contact with water. I don't know if this'll mean anything in the future, but if anything happens, be sure to call me. At this, Izuku lets out a nervous, high-pitched titter. You see, I lost my phone, when I was pulled off the ship. All Might shrugs casually, smiling. No need to worry about that too much, my boy. I'll just get in contact with your mother until you get a replacement phone. Izuku sighs in relief. Thanks. No problem at all, Midoriya. And take it easy tomorrow. I have business to attend to at UA High, so I won't be able to train with you. I advise against swimming in the ocean alone, since you're new to this whole thing, but feel free to mess around with water at home a bit. If your mother's fine with it, that is. Izuku nods, and Enko hums her approval. Pushing his hair back out of his face, Izuku turns and grabs 2 cups of tea, walking over to the table to serve it to All Might and his mother. He tries not to feel embarrassed when his mother gently takes one of his hands and inspects it with an expression of wonder on her face. All Might stifles a chuckle when she carefully spreads his fingers apart to stare at the webbing with wide eyes. Despite the awkwardness, Izuku finds himself growing more relaxed. Maybe this won't be so bad. It's supposed to be sunny and dry tomorrow, Izuku. Maybe you could go pick up some groceries while I'm at work. That's up to you, though. If you'd like to stay home, it's okay, Enko suggests, dragging her eyes up and away from Izuku's hand. For a moment, Izuku hesitates. However, he pushes back any urge to stay shut in at home and grins. I can do that. The following day, Shouto walks along the sidewalk, Momo matching his pace on his left. They haven't planned anything in particular, other than wander aimlessly along the beachfront looking for interesting stores to walk into and then out of without buying anything. All in all, the day was panning out as just another lazy day spent wandering around. Though this time, Shouto has the phone he found in his pocket, now operational after sitting in a bowl of rice for 12 hours. His plan was originally to turn it into the police to find the owner, but now he'd prefer to try giving it to Deku in person. Hands resting casually in the pockets of his thin gray hoodie, he lets out a sigh. He glances off in the direction of the ocean, thoughts occupied by fish, coral, flouncing jellyfish, and a boy with seafoam teal hair and wide, leaf green eyes. You can go for a swim if you want, I need to run errands later anyways, Momo says, snapping Shouto back to the present. He turns his head to meet her dark eyes for a moment before forcing his face to return to its neutral state. I'm fine. You're not, she sighs. Shouto furrows his brow, but can't find any words to shoot back. She's right. He desperately wants to submerge himself in the water for a few hours and forget all his concerns, and hopefully see the strange boy again. Momo sighs, seemingly in resignation. She doesn't hound him any longer, which he's thankful for, but she does point in the direction of a small privately owned supermarket facing the beach. I need to pick up a few things there. Mind coming with me? Maybe it'll help you take your mind off things. He considers politely declining for a few moments, then sees the merits of taking his mind off things and nods. Momo gives him a gentle smile, squeezing his shoulder momentarily before turning to cross the street. As soon as they enter the store, Shouto shudders at the blast of frigid air conditioning that hits him in the face. It soon passes, however, and the cool inside of the store is a nice change from the intense heat beating down on the beachfront. Shouto lets out a relieved sigh, and Momo begins leading the way down the aisles, basket in hand to gather up what she needs. He's relieved to be led around rather than choosing where to go. Now, he can focus on the way Momo flits around the store like a bird, brow furrowed in concentration when she looks at price tags and compares items. She's busily comparing 2 small coil-bound notebooks when Shouto feels someone bump into his shoulder. Flinching on instinct, he backs up a step with wide eyes, head whipping around to take in the stranger's appearance. The first he sees is a mess of wild, dark green curls and freckles. The boy pushes his hair out of his face as he exclaims, I am so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going. Summer green eyes and a voice ridiculously similar to the whistling mer speech of Deku. The boy trails off, eyes just as wide as Shouto's must be. He holds a shopping list in his right hand and a basket laden with groceries in his left. Taking in his appearance, Shouto notices he's wearing a plain white t-shirt with Captain America's shield printed across the chest, baggy blue sweatpants, and large red shoes. A yellow backpack is slung from his right shoulder. It's Momo that breaks the silence hanging between the two boys by approaching, holding the same two notebooks she'd been squinting at moments earlier. "Hey, Todoroki, I can't decide between these two notebooks. Have you got any idea which one I should?" Her voice breaks off, her gaze darting between the two boys. The green-haired boy lets his fringe fall back over his eyes, lowering his face and clearing his throat. I need to go. My mum. Is this yours?" Shouto blurts out, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing the phone with the All Might case. Deku widens his eyes, his mouth hanging open in shock. He catches himself, shutting his mouth again and reaching forward to take the phone from Shouto's hand. "Yeah, it is. How did you find it?" Shouto glances around to make sure nobody is close enough to hear them, then takes a breath and does the first thing that comes to his mind. Something that'll prove whether or not the boy before him is actually the mer he met near the cove. "I was swimming around the reef and found it in the sand." He chirps softly through his teeth, which is somewhat painful for his throat when not in his half-mer form, but still doable. Deku widens his eyes, pursing his lips as the color drains from his face. Shouto immediately regrets speaking in mer language, bringing his hands up to show he means no harm. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle." I can't. Deku stutters, shifting his weight from foot to foot uncomfortably as the grocery list in his hand begins to crumple from the way his grip tightens. Shouto takes a deep breath. He's about to speak again when Deku whispers, You're the half-mer I saw. Right, that was me, yes. And you're Nereus, right. He replies, the corner of his mouth quirking up ever so slightly in the ghost of a smile. Deku groans, tilting his head back towards the ceiling. God, that was embarrassing. I'm so sorry I said that. You certainly didn't look old enough to be the old man of the sea. Just saying. The boy looks at him with flushed cheeks, a withering expression on his face. It's ridiculously comical, in Shouto's opinion, and he has to force his face to stay mostly neutral as Deku mutters, "Can we please stop talking about my ridiculous slip of the tongue?" All right, Shouto extends his hand towards the boy, who stares at it as though Shouto's holding a weapon. Let's retry our introduction. I'm Shouto Todoroki. After the initial shock, Deku lets out a relieved breath and drops the grocery list in his basket. Taking Shouto's hand in his, the boy gives him a lopsided, awkward smile and replies, Izuku Midoriya. Something flutters in Shouto's chest as the boy finally smiles for real, like the fish Shouto once caught in his hands before letting it go. Thankfully, he manages to keep his face neutral as he responds, "It's less cringe-worthy than Nereus, I'll give you that." Izuku groans and looks as if he's about to shoot back a retort, but they're interrupted by Momo, who sighs, "You're pretty bad at hiding secrets, you know. If a hunter had seen you and done the same thing, you'd be dead already." The boy releases Shouto's hand, rubbing at the back of his neck awkwardly. The corners of his eyes crinkle, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I know, I'm kinda new to this this whole thing." Shouto wants to pry, but he restrains himself, instead shrugging and offering, "I could help you. I just want one thing in exchange." Izuku widens his eyes, his white teeth flashing as he cracks an excited grin. "Sure, what is it you want? Tell me how you became a full one. A mer, that is." Momo shoots him a look, and Izuku's wide green eyes grow even wider, sparking with surprise. He reaches up to fiddle with the material of his shirt with a reply of, it wasn't my choice. It was, it was kind of forced on me. I don't know, I was drowning from that Leviathan dragging me down and I guess some passing mer took pity on me and changed me into this to save my life. I'm not really happy with how things turned out, but, I prefer this over dying." An old woman wanders into the aisle, so the three act natural as three teenagers whispering in a supermarket could be, until she leaves with a box of pencils. Once she's gone, Shouto runs a hand through his hair in exasperation and sighs, "So I need to have a near-death experience at sea, is that it?" Izuku raises his free hand, waving it wildly as he stammers, "Please don't try to kill yourself at sea. Honestly, it's not worth. It'd have to be through other means than drowning, if I did do it. I can't drown." He points to the side of his neck to indicate what he means. I know that. But, why do you want to become a mer so badly? You're set to attend the Leviathan Hunter course at UA High and you're the son of the number 2 Leviathan Hunter. You're pretty much set for life. It's an honest question with no ill intent behind it, but Izuku's words still turn Shouto's stomach and threaten to put him in a foul mood. His expression must have changed, because Izuku's face becomes worried and he backs up a few steps. "Oh, I didn't mean. No, don't worry about it too much. I just don't feel right on land. I don't know, it's difficult to explain." Shouto sighs. Yet, at his vague explanation, Izuku gives him an understanding smile and laughs gently. "I understand what you mean. You don't feel like you belong here. I was that way with school for quite a while when I was a kid. My mother homeschooled me for 4 years. So I can relate, I think." Increasingly more relaxed with the green-haired boy, Shouto opens his mouth to speak, but his phone begins to buzz insistently from his pocket. Izuku cocks his head to the side a bit, looking as though he wants to ask who it is, but seems to think better of it and readjusts his basket of groceries. When Shouto answers the phone, he's greeted by a very, very unwelcome voice. "Shouto, father," he says abruptly, his brow furrowing in irritation. "Training is cancelled today. A Leviathan's attacking a cruise liner a few miles off of Okinawa and I won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest." The man grumbles bad-naturedly on the other end of the line. Shouto manages to stifle a sigh of relief as he flatly responds, "I understand," and she hangs up first, leaving Shouto to heave a sigh of relief. That is, until he notices the way Izuku watches him intently, brow furrowed and mouth set in a line. Shouto meets his gaze levelly for a few moments before he's completely caught off guard by Izuku saying, "You're very, very tense. Is your relationship with your father strained? Or, that's none of your concern," Shouto responds, with a bit more venom in his tone than he intends. Izuku's brows lower even more, and concern alights in his green eyes, but he takes a breath and doesn't pry any further. Instead, he gives Shouto a wobbly, lopsided grin and laughs. "I'm sorry, I must have been misreading you. You read me perfectly well." The words float to the front of Shouto's mind, and he hurriedly pushes them back. He realizes now that Izuku, despite being awkward and bad at hiding his other form, is terrifyingly perceptive. Izuku reaches again for the shopping list that rests in his basket and holds it up so that Momo and Shouto can see it. "Well, it was really nice to meet you both. Oh, shoot, I never asked your name." Izuku immediately sticks the shopping list in his mouth and offers his hand to Momo, who shakes it and gives her name. Once they've introduced themselves to one another, Izuku grabs the list again and laughs awkwardly. "Sorry, that was rude of me. But, I should probably check my phone for any damage before I ask for your number. So, are you busy this afternoon? If you're not, I could meet you on the beach where, near where we first met. I don't know if I want to go in the water, but, we could talk about how I can keep myself from being discovered, and, maybe we can think of ways to make you a full mer. Since that's what you wanted." Izuku stumbles over his words, as though he's not used to asking people for things. Somewhat charmed, Shouto nods. "I'd like that. Is there a specific time you'd like me to meet you there?" Izuku lets out a relieved sigh, shoulders slumping as he relaxes. His mouth once again quirks into a lopsided smile, and Shouto feels for a moment like he's looking at the sun. No, not in terms of the squinting and burning of your corneas, but rather the sheer brilliance of the boy despite his obvious nervousness. "I should be free around 5. I'll see you then." Shouto nods, and the boy gives him one last wobbly smile before excusing himself and heading towards the checkout. He doesn't notice the breath he's been holding in until he lets it out heavily. This turns out to be a mistake, because he suddenly feels Momo's hand on his shoulder, which startles him, and turns to look at her. She's giving him a knowing look which borders on shit-eating grin territory, and Shouto has to stifle a groan when she murmurs, "You've got it bad, HM. "Got what bad?" "Let me see those notebooks." He tries to change the subject, reaching for the notebooks in Momo's hand, when she releases his shoulder and holds the notebooks close to her chest. Her look becomes marginally more serious, and she continues, "You think he's cute. It's been written on your face ever since he bumped into you. Which is fine and dandy, but, he was reading you like a book the whole time. If you want to get closer to him, you're either going to have to rein in every single aspect of your body language to prevent him from figuring out what's going on with you at home, or you could eventually tell him." Momo's cut off by Shouto muttering in response, "I don't need to do either of those things. I just see him as an ally and nothing more. Keep telling yourself that if it makes you feel better." "But seriously, Todoroki, he was reading both of our emotions from our body language alone. He was fine when he read me, but didn't you see how he just tensed right up when he read you? That's some talent he's got." "It's fine." Momo opens her mouth as if to speak, but thinks better of it and stops pressing the issue. Shouto lets himself breathe, relieved that she's dropped the issue of his home life, but immediately chokes on air when she says in a low voice, "You didn't deny it when I said you think he's cute." "Ooh, okay, I'm going to leave now. You can come to the beach if you want, but please for the love of God don't say anything embarrassing." Shouto groans, deciding against lingering with her any longer because if he hears much more, he's going to start getting too flustered and embarrassed to function. Why he's getting flustered, he has no idea. It's a foreign sensation, and quite frankly, a rather unwelcome one. Momo chuckles, calling after him, "Hey, if I get you to the point where you start dating him, would you help me start dating that girl at the music store I won't shut up about?" "That won't happen because you're out of your mind and you're seeing things where there's nothing to be seen." Momo shouts something back, but Shouto's already leaving with his hands pressed to his ears and an exasperated look on his face. The heat outside is just as unwelcome as Momo's teasing and the flustered feelings he's experiencing, and the air above the pavement grows distorted from the heat waves radiating off of it. Shouto immediately starts to regret coming back outside, wishing with all his heart that it was overcast and cool out. He's just removed his hands from his ears when he catches a glimpse of Green walking across the parking lot a good distance to his right. When Shouto turns his head to look, he sees Izuku walking along with a paper bag of groceries pressed to his chest and his eyes fixated on the shopping list he holds, lips moving and brow furrowed. He mumbles to himself, perhaps. Stopping, he watches the boy go for a moment. At this distance, it's a little harder to get a grasp of his appearance, but even from here, Shouto can see that the boy is in ridiculously good shape. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he can tell from the shape of Izuku's arms and calves that he's built up a good bit of muscle. He's about to turn away and keep walking when Izuku seems to notice him and calls across the parking lot, "Todoroki-kun." Shouto stops again, turning to see the boy approaching with that same wobbly smile on his face. When they face each other again, Izuku stammers, Is it alright that I call you that?" "Why wouldn't it be?" I don't know, I'm just not used to having friends." Blinking once in surprise, Shouto cocks his head to the side. "Why wouldn't a person like you have friends?" The boy brings his hand up to scratch at the side of his head, gaze focused on Shouto's feet. "I mentioned before that I don't. I feel out of place in school." You're bullied, then." His green eyes go wide, and he holds out his free hand at a gesture somewhere between panicked flailing and mock surrender. "That's a little bit harsh. My classmates don't like me, but I wouldn't say I'm bullied." Shouto notices the way his eyes flash with panic, though. So he is bullied. As though summoned out of thin air, there's suddenly a ridiculously angry shout from their left, in the direction of the road running along the beach. Shouto turns his head just in time to see a rock the size of a cherry fly through the air and connect with the side of Izuku's head. Izuku bites his lip, wincing as he brings a hand up to where the rock hit. "Deku, you fucking loser, what the fuck are you doing?" Izuku and Shouto turn to see Katsuki Bakugo stomping closer, fists clenched and teeth bared like an angry Pomeranian. Furrowing his brow, Shouto sets his mouth in a line and meets Bakugo's red eyes. He pauses about 5 feet from the two, his gaze darting between the two boys a few times before settling on Shouto. "The fuck are you doing here, you half and half piece of shit?" He spits venomously, and Shouto feels more than sees the way Izuku flinches at his voice. Shouto turns so he's facing Bakugo, responding levelly, "I was at the grocery store and happened to run into Midoriya here. We were just talking." Bakugo snorts. "Well, you saw how this fucker pulled that goddamn stunt and almost fucking died. He's a fucking moron and I've come to beat his broccoli ass." Izuku readjusts the grocery bag in his hands, stammering, "Kakaken, I really need to go." "What's the point of you beating his ass, anyways?" Shouto asks Bakugo, quirking an eyebrow in confusion. "Because I got him feel like it, you shit." Now, Shouto looks over in Izuku's direction and nods towards his arms. "He seems like he could hold his own against you. I mean, he did survive a Leviathan of that size without help." Bakugo's eyebrows lower even more, and wrinkles form between his eyebrows. He looks even angrier than before, but he also looks as though he's reevaluating his position in relation to Izuku. Wrinkling his nose in distaste, he looks Izuku up and down before spitting at his feet and stepping closer. Grabbing the front of Izuku's shirt and yanking him up off his feet, the blonde lowers his voice into a snarl and says, "You're getting off easy this time, you shitty nerd, but next time I'm gonna turn you into paste on the sidewalk." He drops Izuku back on his feet before wedging his hands in the pockets of his orange and black board shorts and stomping away, just as loudly as he'd come. Beside Shouto, Izuku heaves a relieved sigh. He glances towards the boy, who places his shopping list in his pocket and tries in vain to push his fringe out of his face. Already, he's muttering about how badly I need a haircut, as if Bakugo hadn't even come. "You're all right?" Shouto asks. Izuku glances at Shouto with wide eyes, still holding his hair away from the right side of his face. "Oh, yeah, I'm all right. Once he's gone I can relax." "No, I mean, he hit you in the head with a rock. Are you hurt?" He clarifies, craning his neck to the side to better see the right side of Izuku's head. With a lopsided smile, Izuku turns his head so Shouto can see. "I'm not sure, it smarts, but I didn't feel any blood there. I should be fine." Still, Shouto leans closer to see. From what he can tell without touching Izuku, there's no blood or any major damage, so he backs away. "It looks all right. I guess I'll head out, then. I've got some stuff to do, so I guess I'll see you this evening." He lies, knowing full well he's just going to wander around the beachfront staring wistfully out at the sea until his meeting time with Izuku. Izuku nods, sending his green curls bouncing around his face. "Oh okay." Shouto ignores the excitement that wells up in his chest, giving the boy a quiet farewell as he turns to leave. "Does this make us friends?" Sitting on a large, flat boulder, Izuku watches the white-capped waves crash into the shore under a golden sky, streaked with pink. The scent of salt water and the cry of seagulls keep Izuku alert, and it takes all of his willpower to prevent himself from moving towards the water and diving in. Taking a deep breath, he turns his attention to the sand and rises to his bare feet. He picks his way through the boulder-ridden beach, feeling the warmth from the day's heat radiating through the sand and rocks. Every once in a while, he stops and looks into a small tide pool. As he watches a mob of minnows dart through a knee-deep crag in the rocks, a larger wave crashes into the shore. The tide's gonna come in soon. He chews his lip with apprehension, going back to looking through tide pools. He's staring at a soft pink clamshell at the bottom of one when he hears a voice behind him. "Hey." Izuku turns to see Shouto moving carefully through the boulders, wearing gray and white board shorts, a white t-shirt, and faded blue and brown flip-flops. Izuku grins at him from where he squats next to the tide pool. "Hey, I was almost worried you weren't gonna come." Shouto stops before him, readjusting the plain satchel slung across his shoulder before responding, "Well, you don't need to worry. I said I'd come, and I did." He cranes his neck to look at the tide pool Izuku was looking into and asks, "What were you looking at?" "Oh, just a clamshell," he says dismissively, but Shouto comes over to kneel beside him. Upon seeing the shell, a tiny smile quirks the corner of his mouth upward. "It's really pretty," he comments, reaching forward into the water and grasping it as the skin on his arm shimmers and becomes covered in red and white scales. When he withdraws his hand, holding up the clamshell for Izuku to see, his forearm looks as it did during their first meeting, when both of them were in their merforms. He seems completely unbothered by the partial transformation, Izuku notices, as he carefully inspects the shell. Both of their heads turn when a loud wave crashes into the rocks, sending fine mist spraying across the both of them. Izuku flinches away from the water, expecting Shouto to do the same, but instead staring at him in surprise as the boy lets out a heavy breath and closes his eyes. Although the mist is far too fine to cause either of them to transform, Izuku checks himself to make sure he's not changing form. When he's satisfied with how he looks, he opens his mouth to speak, but stops when Shouto zips the shell into the pocket of his shorts and stands up. His eyes are marginally wider than normal, and he makes his way towards the water, stepping out of his sandals, dropping his satchel, and starting to remove his shirt. "To Todoroki, where are you?" Izuku begins, and Shouto glances over his shoulder. "I'm going for a swim. Are you coming or are you going to stay here?" The boy responds, turning slightly to face Izuku. It's then that Izuku once again finds his eyes drawn to the dark scar that runs from his left eye all down the left side of his body. It looks oddly like dripping and splattered liquid, indicating a burn scar of some sort, but he doesn't ask. Shouto seems to notice Izuku staring and averts his eyes. As he shuffles with barely veiling discomfort, Izuku immediately splutters, I didn't mean to stare. I'm sorry." Shouto glances back towards the water and draws nearer to the edge of the water. "It's fine." He stands at the edge for a moment longer, then glances down at the water and takes a step forward. Izuku expects him to be up to his knees in water, but to his shock, the boy just disappears under the water. Panicked, Izuku leaps to his feet and starts moving hurriedly towards the water, skidding to a halt when he sees Shouto's head poke above the water, resting his folded arms on the edge of the rock. A wheezing sigh escapes Izuku as he grasps at his chest. "Oh my god, I didn't know it was that deep." The corner of Shouto's mouth quirks upward and he chirps, "Why would it matter, anyways? You and I won't drown." "Why yeah, but I'm still getting used to this whole thing," Izuku murmurs, dodging water as another small wave impacts the rocks. Shouto watches him curiously for a moment before letting out another string of warbling and hissing sounds. "Why are you so terrified of the sea in the first place?" Izuku purses his lips, and Shouto blinks in surprise. "If I was out of line, don't feel like you have to answer." "I'm sorry. My father died at sea." He vanished when I was 4, and he's never come back. I also nearly drowned when I was 6. So, it's dumb. It's a dumb reason," Izuku explains with a smile, voice quavering just a bit. Gray and blue eyes watch him pensively again for a few moments before he replies, "That's a perfectly valid reason." "It's not dumb." Izuku's eyes widen, and his heart feels just a bit lighter for a moment. Fiddling with a lock of his hair, Izuku laughs softly. "That's really nice of you to say." "Thank you," Shouto shrugs. "In that sense, you could say I'm somewhat scared of the land. You've had better experiences on land, and I've had better experiences at sea. So I suppose you and I are opposites." Izuku doesn't pry, however. The way his eyes darken tells Izuku not to continue, but still, he tentatively moves closer to the edge of the water. Swallowing nervously, he leans forward just a bit to peer into the water below Shouto. It drops away into a deep, crystal-clear abyss that goes probably 30 feet down. Throughout it, colorful fish dart about and kelp and coral shimmer with the waves. It's about this time that Izuku realizes that Shouto has his head and neck above water, and his gills appear to be tightly closed. Lowering himself into a cross-legged position, Izuku gestures to the side of his own neck and asks, How can you breathe above water?" Shouto blinks in surprise, then whistles. "If I tense up the muscles on the sides of my neck tightly enough, I can keep them closed tightly enough to make my normal respiratory system kick in. Most merfolk can do it, but it's tiring." "Oh well, you can go underwater if it's easier for you." Izuku splutters in surprise, worried he's making Shouto tired. Shouto huffs in amusement. "If I did, you wouldn't be able to hear me as well." Izuku takes a deep breath, then rises to his feet and walks back towards where he left his backpack. On the way, he picks up Shouto's satchel, sandals and shirt and rolls them into a bundle. After that, he grabs his own bag and places all of the items high on a boulder. He's aware of Shouto watching him curiously, but when Izuku starts taking off his shirt, Shouto whistles, "You don't need to swim if you're not comfortable doing it." "I know that," Izuku begins, pulling his shoes off and tossing them up on the barnacle-coated boulder, "but I'm not going to get any better at any of this mer stuff if I don't slowly start dealing with my fear." When he takes off his shorts, wearing nothing but his all-might swim trunks, a cool breeze blows and makes him shudder. Picking his way across the rocks with a determined yet worried expression on his face, he thinks, "Now or never." For a moment, he stands at the edge of the boulder, looking down into the deep water. Shouto shuffles sideways along the rock, watching Izuku with equal parts worry and admiration. Izuku glances back up at the horizon, noticing that the sun's just about sunk in below the horizon and a few stars are beginning to show up in the sky. He takes one last, deep breath before taking a step forward and closing his eyes. The water is cold and wraps around him like a blanket. His eyes fly open as his body begins to ache and itch from the transformation, and for a moment, he panics. However, he suddenly feels something grasp his wrists carefully and sees gray and blue eyes watching him. His panic subsides into mild anxiety, and after a moment, Shouto clicks, "How are you feeling?" "Like I want to climb back on shore and kiss the sand. But otherwise, this isn't so bad." He responds with a nervous grin. Shouto's grip is careful and tentative, but Izuku feels comforted by having someone hold onto him. Letting bubbles escape from his nose and gills, Shouto says, "We can go back if you want." "And no, I'm alright." "Are you sure?" "Todoroki, I'm fine." Izuku laughs, or makes a sound as close to laughter as he can get. Though still looking slightly nervous, Shouto nods. Carefully, he lets go of Izuku's wrists and swims backwards just a bit. Izuku takes a moment to figure out how to use his body in this form, but once he's grown more comfortable, he meets Shouto's eyes and chirps, "Can we go to the bottom?" "I suppose so." Shouto hisses back, starting to swim lower. Izuku takes a breath, then shifts his body and starts following Shouto. As they descend, more and more light fades and Izuku begins to notice something fascinating. "Todoroki, your spots are glowing," he exclaims with an excited whistle. Shouto stops in front of some coral, watching Izuku with a curious expression as a small school of fish parts around him. "Yes, that's normal for merfolk. Bioluminescent spots attract fish and let other merfolk know they're there. You have glowing stripes ... and your freckles seem to be glowing as well." Izuku stops, taking a moment to look at his own body. Sure enough, the stripes along his hips and shoulders glow a pale green. It's the fact that the freckles on his shoulders are glowing as well that makes him cover his face with his hands. "Oh, my God," he hisses from between his fingers. "What? I can't believe even my freckles glow." Shouto cocks his head. "It's a little unusual, yeah, but it doesn't look weird." Izuku lowers his hands, meeting Shouto's eyes again. "In fact, you look exactly like a full mer. I'd give anything to look like you." Now, it's Izuku's turn to give him a confused look. "Why can't you just escape into the sea if you're so desperate? You look like you could get along with mers just fine." Izuku immediately regrets what he said, seeing the way Shouto's eyes spark with sadness. Oh, crap, I'm sorry if that was wrong of me to say. I didn't mean." "It's fine. I did try, but my body can't withstand deep sea water pressure. That and I can't use echolocation properly. As in, I can use it but it gives me a headache when I try to emit the right noises. I also encountered a mer once. It tried to kill me since I looked so human." Izuku winces. "Oh ... if you don't mind me asking, what happened?" "With the mer?" "Yeah." Shouto pauses, eyes illuminated by the red and green light from the boy's bioluminescent markings. "I was swimming near my house and I saw a mer with a black tail and scars across his face, arms, tail, and chest. He had black hair and these terrifying blue eyes and for some odd reason, he knew my name. He said my name and I tried to say hello but he just came at me. He clawed the hell out of my foot as I climbed out, but thank God he couldn't follow me on land." Shouto brings his right foot up, showing Izuku the dark scarring he'd noticed earlier. Izuku winces at the thought of being in that sort of situation, and Shouto notices. "I've only ever seen him once, so you shouldn't have to worry. Even if he does meet you, he shouldn't bother you since you're pretty much a full mer." No, that's not what I was thinking about. He takes a breath, "Weren't you scared?" Shouto blinks once, then runs a hand through his hair. "Yeah, that ... was scary. But there's scarier things out there. I can't think of many things more scary than being mauled to death by a bloodthirsty mer." Izuku responds. A few bubbles escape Shouto's mouth and nose as he chuckles silently. "I suppose you're right, but that's enough about me. How'd you end up becoming a mer?" Izuku smirks. "Is this an attempt to try doing the same thing to yourself?" He chirps teasingly. Shouto's lips curve upward the tiniest bit. "Maybe. That wasn't what I was thinking when I asked, though. I'm just curious how you went from a stowaway on my father's ship to a mer who's scared of the ocean." I ... don't know much about how it happened. I was drowning and then I woke up on the beach and went home. When I took a shower the following day, I ended up almost suffocating to death and had to be saved by my mom." Izuku explains, telling Shouto everything he knows while leaving out All Might's interference. Shouto nods thoughtfully, holding his chin in his hand. "So I assume it has something to do with near-death experiences at sea, which is what I originally thought." He closes his eyes for a moment, his expression thoughtful. It's then that Izuku has a sudden thought and moves slightly closer to Shouto. "If, somehow, you do end up becoming a full mer, what are you going to do?" "What do you mean? Are you just going to, disappear into the ocean and never come back?" Shouto gives him a curious look. "That's what I was planning. Maybe I'd come back every few months for some human food or something. I think I'd start to miss soba and ice cream after a while. That means I wouldn't be able to see you for a really long time, right?" A fish flits between them in a panic, but Shouto just cocks his head to the side and responds, "Well, you can become a full mer. You'd be able to find me and see me again. Why are you so concerned about this? We're friends, aren't we? I'd be sad if I couldn't see you again very often." The ocean's huge, and I'd be too scared to go out into the open ocean and try to find you. Shouto widens his eyes in surprise, and Izuku is aware, in the back of his mind, that he can see Shouto almost perfectly well due to apparent night vision. And he's very, very pretty. The boy runs a hand through his two-toned hair again, glancing off to the side. Friends? I suppose we are if you say so. Wait, I'm sorry if you don't consider us friends. I just thought, no, I'd like to be friends. Izuku gives him a wobbly, sharp-toothed grin in the dark. Oh, I'm glad. It's been a while since I had a real friend. He swears he can see the corner of Shouto's mouth quirk upward and immediately wants to make him smile again. If nothing else, just to make this ridiculously somber-looking boy cheer up. As he opens his mouth to chirp a response, Shouto sighs and whistles. Your mother must be getting worried. Should we head up? Why yeah, that's probably a good idea. Izuku stammers, a bit disappointed they have to part so soon. He follows Shouto towards the surface, letting his mind wander off into thoughts of how he could ask Shouto to meet him elsewhere. However, he's abruptly yanked out of them when Shouto stops and Izuku almost rams into him. What is it? Is there something there? Izuku chitters nervously. Shouto takes a moment to react, but when he does, he turns around, eyes slightly wider than normal. Izuku's worried for a moment, but is struck completely dumb when Shouto chirps, Do you think if you bit me I'd become a mer? Excuse me, what? Izuku squawks, eyes wide, this isn't some werewolf fantasy or vampire thing. But don't people who get bit by mers and don't get it immediately treated develop a disease like meningitis? If someone with my circumstances gets bitten by a mer, would it maybe trigger something? Shouto elaborates, gesturing vaguely with one hand. Izuku stares at him for a solid 5 seconds before replying, I have no idea, but are you really willing to risk death from mer fever? It's not pretty. Remember that one hunter who died from it 2 years ago? His brain essentially boiled in his skull and he bled to death internally. I'm sure I have some resistance to mer fever, being partially mer myself. It would either kill me or trigger something, and I'm honestly willing to try. Shouto responds, and his tone is dead serious. Lowering his brows, Izuku watches him for a moment. Look, Todoroki, being human isn't all that bad. I don't think risking death is worth the thin sliver of possibility you'll become a mer. You don't understand my situation? All right. I don't know, I want to try. Todoroki, Izuku hisses, reaching forward abruptly and grabbing his face. It's startling when Todoroki flinches and gasps at the sudden movement before resigning stiffly, but Izuku keeps his hands there. He's careful with his fingers, worried he'll graze Shouto's skin with his claws, but he has to say this. You're right, I don't understand your situation, and you really don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But you're making me worried with all your talk of risking death to become a mer. I don't want to think what'll happen to you if you go through with any of these things. He takes a deep breath before smiling at him and continuing, You said it yourself, that we're friends. That means I'm going to be looking out for you and making sure you don't do anything stupid. Okay, I'll try helping you reach this goal of yours, but I don't want you to get hurt or killed trying to do something risky. Okay. Shouto holds his gaze for a few moments longer, searching Izuku's eyes before lowering his head and chirping, All right. Okay, I'll reevaluate my tactics. I won't do anything rash. Izuku sighs once again, giving the other boy a lopsided grin. I'll hold you to that. In any case, we should be heading up again. Your mother will worry. Shouto responds, leading the way back up to the surface. The tide hasn't quite reached the boulder where Izuku and Shouto's stuff sits, but the waves are beginning to lap at the base of it. Shouto and Izuku exchange a glance before Shouto takes a deep breath, pressing his gills shut and holding a bunch of seawater in his mouth. Izuku assumes this is in case he runs out of breath, and he watches as the taller boy climbs out of the water, walking awkwardly across the rocky shore and reaches up to grab their bags. Izuku can't help but snicker at the way Shouto walks, seeing as his feet aren't completely human and make walking a chore. Shouto gives him a withering glance, tossing Izuku's towel onto a dry rock and beginning to dry his own body off. Todoroki, I can't reach it there. Izuku whistles over, to which Shouto spits out the seawater and chirps back, Tough luck. Shouldn't have laughed at me like that. Okay, I'm sorry. Izuku hisses, risking pulling his shoulders and upper body out of the water to grasp at his towel. Luckily, Shouto gives in after his gills meld back into human skin and moves closer to hand the towel to Izuku. After a brief nod of gratitude, Izuku begins busily drying his hair and neck. It's not long before he can once again breathe above water and he pulls himself up to sit on the shore, drying the rest of his body. Shouto kneels on the rock next to him, watching the reflections of the stars dancing on the water. Every once in a while, Izuku feels Shouto's eyes burning into his skin, or more specifically, his tail, and tries to ignore it. Will I see you again? Shouto asks, now looking back at Izuku's face. Izuku sets about drying the rest of his body, chuckling as he replies, Why, so you can stare at me more. And no, Shouto stammers, running a hand through his hair, I enjoy talking to you. You're an interesting person. I've enjoyed talking with you. Izuku tries his hardest not to blush at that, firmly reminding himself that Shouto is a friend, nothing more. Especially since they'd technically only known each other for a single day. I've enjoyed talking with you, too. Izuku replies with a smile. Shouto's mouth curves into the ghost of a smile, and he nods. Pulling his clothes on, he rises to his feet. This was nice. Took my mind off things, he murmurs as he slips his shoes back on. If you're not busy tomorrow, I'll probably be in that cove I mentioned. It's not hard to find if you know where to look. And if you're careful of the jellyfish. Izuku laughs nervously. I'll pass on risking jellyfish stings. Yeah, it's not the greatest feeling ever. You got stung once. Yeah, I was 8. I thought I could pet one. Shouto says with a shrug, which pulls a chuckle from Izuku. Well, that's not so bad. When I was 5, I took the name jellyfish very literally. As in, I thought they were made of jelly. My mom told me the truth, though. Izuku replies. You must have felt so betrayed. The taller boy says, eyes glittering with amusement. Izuku rises to his feet, pulling his clothes on as he laughs. Was I ever? Almost had an existential crisis right then and there. An existential crisis at the tender age of 5. You must be so jaded. Izuku puts on a dramatic face, clutching at his chest in an exaggerated manner. I am so very jaded, you have no idea. MMHM. I'm sure you are. Izuku laughs, breaking his melodramatic act. When his laughter subsides, he's aware of Shouto watching him with wonder and subtle happiness in his heterochromatic eyes. Clearing his throat, he straightens up and smiles in his friend's direction. Sorry for going off like that, he apologizes. I got caught up in the moment a bit. Shouto shakes his head. No, I don't mind. I just don't think I've met someone like you before. Like me how? Someone who laughs so readily. Izuku cocks his head to the side, hands in the pockets of his pants. Is it making you uncomfortable? I can hold it back. No, it's nice. Silence hangs between them like a heavy fog, allowing awkwardness to set in. Shouto and Izuku break each other's gazes, glancing away. Shouto coughs, and Izuku lets out a low whistle. In any case, I'll see you tomorrow. Shouto murmurs in a soft voice, catching Izuku's attention again. Izuku glances back at him, trying to contain his excitement. Sure thing. Where should we meet up? Here is fine. A grin spreads across Izuku's face then. Sounds like a plan. Any specific time? Or, anytime after noon is fine. I'll see you then. It was nice meeting you, Todoroki, Izuku says, gathering up his things and starting to jog in the direction of his house. Shouto rises, turning to face Izuku and raising his hand tentatively. As he calls a soft goodbye, Izuku's sure he sees a smile on Shouto's face, illuminated by moonlight. Shouto, upon returning to his house, makes his way around to the back door. There are less creaky floorboards there, and therefore, less chance of catching Inji's unwanted attention. Even before he enters the house, he removes his sandals and leaves them on the step outside. There would be less noise if he just went in with bare feet. Slowly, he opens the door and enters the quiet house, scarcely daring to breathe. He moves along the hallway, hugging the wall in an attempt to be as silent as possible. His bedroom door is in sight, and he makes sure he's extra quiet during this last stretch. Rolling his feet inward while he walks, lips pursed, he slows right down and creeps closer. A shaky hand reaches out, turning the doorknob, before he opens the door and enters. Once his door is closed, he leans against it, staring at the dark ceiling. His tension fades ever so slightly as he releases the breath he's been holding for a solid 2 minutes. Hanging his satchel on the hook behind the door, he moves through the inky blackness to the window, where he opens the curtains and allows silvery moonlight to flood into the room. Now, everything is bathed in soft light from the moon and stars. His bed, the bare walls, his computer desk, his laptop, everything. The sight of it, the feeling of isolation that washes over Shouto, is welcomed. He watches the reflection of the night sky dance across the water's surface for a while longer, opening his window to feel the saltwater breeze on his skin. Another heavy sigh escapes him, and he rests his weight on his crossed arms. Once again, he sees summer green eyes and freckles like constellations framed by forest green, then whitish teal hair. He feels the water wrap around his body again, disturbed only by his own movements and the movements of his friend. My friend. Shouto tests the word out in his mind, immediately thinking of Momo as well. He has one friend already, but having another one certainly feels nice. In his study in the house, Todoroki is unaware of his son's absence. He's so focused on the broken sounds coming from his computer that he fails to notice Shouto's return, as well. Brow furrowed, a dangerous look in his eyes, he replays the audio again. The vague, static Y sounds of muted whistles and chirps come from the speakers. Rubbing at his stubble, Enji grunts bad-naturedly. This both perplexes and angers him, seeing as the security device he'd planted in the reef to pick up sounds of illegal watercraft was hardly a kilometer from the shore outside his home. Picking up mer speech this close to land certainly wasn't something he expected. Goddamit, he growls, immediately forming a plan to search for whichever 2 mers had been stupid enough to wander this close to his area of responsibility. Of course, as per usual, he plans to take Shouto along with him, whether his son likes it or not. Chapter 6, Important Announcement. Chapter Text. Hey all, I'm sorry for being so dead, but I'll explain why now. Since being a content creator for the BNHA fandom has taken such a dramatic toll on my mental health and my creative motivation, I'm making a small announcement. I'm abandoning a few of my fics, so if anyone wants to pick them up and continue them, please contact me on Twitter and I'll give complete ownership of the fic over to you. All I ask is that you credit me for the idea in the fic summary. So the fics I'm abandoning are: I just crave peace, https://archiveofferon.org/work/1250596/chapters/28472808, where the water is flowing, https://archiveofferon.org/work/1188410one/chapters/2683825. Ali Ali Oxenfree, https://archiveofferon.org/work/1601606/chapters/373777164. Now for the explanation as to why I'm abandoning these. I'm leaving the BNHA fandom. I have too many ongoing longfics in progress, and honestly, I'd like to spend as little time in this fandom as possible. I'll finish PTW, Guillotine, and hit for the cycle, but after that, you likely won't see another BNHA fic from me again. I'm sorry, but the amount of abuse, art theft, reposts, and fan-made content that triggers my PTSD has been way too much for me to deal with, and this fandom isn't as welcoming as it once was. This is the worst fanbase I've ever been a part of, and although I've had a handful of good experiences here, the bad times have completely swamped the good ones. I have been yelled at by an artist who draws NSFW of Endeavor and Shouto for asking them to please tag their disgusting content so I don't need to see it. I have been called a pedophile for writing Todoroki fluff. I've had so many pieces of BNHA fanart I've created reposted, stolen, or traced to the point that I can't stand to look at my own art anymore, and when I ask most of these repost accounts to take down my art, I'm attacked or blocked. I've had a recent influx of people complaining about how I write, swamping the comments of my fics with negativity, and I've had people requesting me to write and draw disgusting, abusive, incestuous, or pedophilic content for them, and had people send me a non-hate on Tumblr about how I write, draw, and pretty much do anything in this fandom. It's taken me 3 years to recover from depression and 2 suicide attempts, and this crap is dragging me down again. So I'm done. Thank you for sticking with me for these past 2 years I've been creating content for BNHA, and if you unfollow me, hate me, or upset with me, I completely understand, and I'm sorry. All of you who have been kind to me, thank you. You've kept me pushing on for a much longer time than I thought I'd be here, and you made my dark days feel a little bit brighter. If you still want to see content from me, I'm active on Twitter and Instagram. I hope you all have wonderful experiences ahead of you, and I hope you understand why I need to leave. Thank you, Hida. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through What If Deku Becomes a Leviathan Hunter. I hope you found it as intriguing and thought-provoking as we did. A big shout out to PsychoLimbo for crafting such a compelling story. Don't forget to check out their profile on fanfiction.net for more amazing works. The link is in the description below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Deku Fanfic for more fascinating explorations into the world of fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we're always excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you guys in the next video.